At 6 p.m. Calling the meeting to order. We'll start with a pledge of allegiance. I'm going to ask Chairman Whitlock to lead us in that, and then we'll do a roll call.
Yes. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. We have quite a few items on the agenda tonight. I'd like to move through them quickly as possible. But before that, I'll do the roll call. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's start with Commissioner Sheen.
Adam Shin, no conflicts.
Lisa Jensen, no conflicts.
Daniel Gonzalez, no conflicts.
Andrew South, no conflicts.
Jeff Whitlock, no conflicts.
Yeah. Just as I was saying, we'll make sure everything gets its due time. We do not have new items on the agenda after 9. If one item spills over past 9, we will not take up any new items on the agenda. We'll delay it to the next meeting. Although this is a public hearing, only the presenters and those invited by the commission may speak or ask questions unless otherwise invited by the chair. Please wait to speak until called on. When speaking, please be sure to speak into the microphone so that the record is clear. Please state your name and city of residence for the record. Please limit side conversations as they interfere with the audio recording. If you need to have a side conversation, please step out of the chambers. Please do not attempt to interrupt or speak over others. Intimidating or threatening speech or behavior will not be tolerated at any time. Please refrain from clapping, cheering, booing, or being otherwise disruptive during the hearing. We'll begin with reading item number 1. Provo City Council requests an ordinance text amendment to section 14.34.440, second kitchen in one family dwellings, to clarify and update the standards. This is a citywide application. Staff member Malia Daly will be presenting.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, commissioners, for letting us come to you tonight. We actually have 4 items. The first 4 are from our office. So I'm going to kind of give background on all 4 of them and then walk through them if you're okay with that.
Yes, please.
Okay, perfect. So I believe it was in the staff report as well, but all 4 of these items, these come from some council work meetings and amendments that we passed earlier this year. If you remember the end of last year, we came to you with some code cleanup things to our ADU ordinance, chapter 1430. Those got passed in January of this year. As part of that meeting, the council also directed council staff to look at what we called supplemental ADU rules. So different parts of code, whether in 1430 or otherwise, that affect ADUs as far as their enforcement and how they're kind of just how they're created, who can use them, anything like that. So council staff went ahead and did that. We held different meetings with community members, development services, legal. There's actually a planning commissioner that came to some of those meetings as well. We invited through all of those, we came up with 5. We held a couple of work meetings on them, and through those we came up with 5 code recommendations, 4 of which involve chapter 14, which is why they're coming to planning commission. That 5th one, I'll just let you know what that one is a update to the rental disclosure agreement, which is found in chapter 6. That currently rental disclosures are a disclosure statement that landlords and tenants are required to sign by code, but the city does not then take those in and record those or track those in any way. Enforcement does, though, use the disclosure documents and asks, they have to be provided to the city if asked. And enforcement just uses those to enforce on mainly over occupancy cases and rental dwellings. And so there's just an update to that landlords and tenants have to provide a copy to the city. The landlord does once that is signed, and that those disclosures also have to include a list of all the cars that are going to be operated from that property. So that is in chapter 6, and that is separate, and the council will be voting on that the same time they do these 4, but that is not coming to you. Anyway, Just wanted to give you the full context. So I'll get into this first one here. So this is item 1. This is the council code recommendation regarding second kitchen agreements. There we go. So this isn't actually substantive as much as there's edits here. This doesn't change the actual of when second kitchens are allowed or where they're allowed or anything like that. This is just a simplification. As we're reviewing second kitchen agreements, legal and code enforcement let us know that it was really confusing to their staff and citizens to know when a second kitchen was allowed, when was an ADU allowed. There was like 2 different documents you had to sign if you had a second kitchen and then switched over and you had a legal ADU, or if you had a legal ADU, second kitchen. Anyway, what we're doing is simplifying the language and including that all on the one document. So that way, when people are registering a second kitchen or then all the information about an ADU is included at the same time, so they understand that. And then also it's tracked on one document that legal enforcement can have. So it's really an administrative process kind of back end thing, but enforcement and legal asked us to make this change because it would make enforcement a little bit easier for them. So this is just kind of a summary of that. So that's our first amendment. If you have any questions.
Go ahead.
I had 2 questions on this one, just so that I understand it. On letter F, it's page 3 of the staff report at the bottom. It says residents of the dwelling unit shall allow anyone from Provo City staff to inspect. And I was just wondering, is that at any time, or is that only if prompted by suspicion of a violation? Like they can literally just call them up and say, hey, we want to inspect your kitchen?
I believe it's a time of application, but then suspicion of, I also don't think code enforcement in my conversations is going around just inspecting people's things.
Well, I
but
wouldn't
that's-
imagine they were, but I was wondering if this was like
I'm
the
not sure. That
intent.
would be a question for legal and code
Okay.
enforcement on that.
My second question is on H. The
Yes.
second phrase of that didn't really make sense to me. So I was wondering if you could explain what H is saying.
Yeah, so this is just saying if you have a second kitchen and you don't have an ADU, then the owners of the dwelling unit that has the second kitchen, you can have the second kitchen provided that, okay, this is.
It sounds like
okay.
it's saying that you can't have like a caregiver live in that area.
Yes, this is why I wish legal was here. Basically, you can have a caregiver if you have a second kitchen, but you can't have an ADU unless you're in an ADU zoned area. This is just combining those 2 codes into one, but I will make a note of that because that's confusing me as well and ask legal.
Yeah, I just felt like I wasn't sure why, because the provided, however, makes me think that that's an important phrase, and I wasn't exactly sure whether it was a good or a bad thing that was provided there. So just make sure that that says what you wanted to say.
Yep. Good note. Thank
That was
you,
it.
Commissioner Jensen.
I have a question.
Yes.
To what degree should we consider all of these 4 items as puzzle pieces that all kind of go together versus considering them in isolation?
That's up to you if you want to. I'm going to do them in isolation because that's
Okay.
how the council is viewing them and how they are going to pass.
But there's
them.
not like a lot of dependencies.
No.
Like there isn't if we disagree with item 3, item 1 becomes
No.
problematic. Okay.
No.
There's no dependencies. Okay, that's good to know. Another question I have is just for my education. So essentially the purpose of this part of the code is to just prevent shadow ADUs. Is that,
Yes.
yeah. There isn't like safety or health concerns. It's really just
Yes.
to prevent shadow ADUs.
Yep.
Thank you.
If it helps you to know, I have a kitchen in my basement because I live in a zone that isn't prohibited. But I had to go into the city and sign a document saying I promised I wouldn't rent it out, so that they're aware that there's the possibility for an ADU there, but someone has said, I'm not going to break the law. Right? And this is just combining that so that it works better with the ADU laws.
Yes.
Does anyone else have any other questions for staff member? No? Does anyone want to, I haven't done this for a while, so I'm gonna look at the,
Open a public hearing.
yeah. Thank you, Malia.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, we'll now open the hearing to public comments. When your time is up, you will hear a ding and the microphone will be muted. Each person may make one comment. If we have questions, we'll invite you to come back to the microphone at that time. This time is for comments only. If you have questions about an item, please speak with staff member Malia Daly privately. Are there any district chairs present? We'll start with district chairs. I see none. Let's go ahead and open this up to public comment, where you will have 2 minutes each to comment. Any members from the public here to comment on item number 1? We'll go ahead and close the item number 1 public comment portion. Okay, commissioners, let's have a discussion. And if there's anyone, yeah, after which we could make any motions or have any polls or whatever.
I'm all for anything that simplifies the job for the enforcement people that are on the ground. So having a more easily understandable process sounds like a great thing to me.
I'm in agreement. Any other comments by commissioners? Someone want to put forward a motion?
I'll make a motion.
Oh,
I just have a
Commissioner
comment.
South real quick.
Like a bunch of these 4 items, while we're looking at them at standalone, items, they all connect with this notion, are discussing ADUs in some shape or another. And while I agree with Commissioner Jensen, I love the fact that we're looking at things to make it more simple for enforcement and for staff. It feels it's not overly clear what we're trying to do with this. We lead off with the existence of more than one kitchen in a 1-family dwelling unit is prohibited. Like, is that really what we're trying to do here? Is we want to prohibit more than one kitchen in the units? And I know that the ADU topic is a hot one. And it's one that's been contested a little bit. And I don't feel like we're out of the woods in terms of having a clear long-term plan on what we're going to do there. As evidenced by our own city making some, potential changes there. So starting to constrain what we're doing in the construction of homes, potentially, or reconstruction, I think has got longer term implications than maybe the policy things that we're discussing in parallel. So I just have some reservations with trying to start to fiddle with that. If it was just straight up, we're trying to help with enforcement. It feels like it's more than that.
I feel like it's just restating what was already there because the part that it's added onto is now number 3.
Mm-hmm.
It says 1 or more additional kitchens are allowed only if. And so I think they're starting off the language by saying, really, we only want you to have 1 kitchen. But if you have 2 kitchens, here's the rules. And so if we took out number 1 and said, you can
Right.
have 2 kitchens
Right,
under these
right.
rules and make
Yep.
it not sound so prohibitive.
Yep.
Then I think people jump to we can have 2 kitchens without reading. I don't know. I feel like they missed the important part, which is we don't want to turn every house into a motel. So that's why it doesn't bother me because I feel like that was already the rule and they haven't changed the rule. But the language seems shocking to you because it just comes right out with, we don't want you to have this.
To me, I'll just dovetail on what Commissioner South was saying is that I think the order of these items is a little bit suboptimal for me, for lack of a better term. We're bike shedding here. Bike shedding is it's from a Dilbert cartoon, which basically says the item on the agenda is the nuclear reactor, whether or not to build it, but they spend 90% of the meeting talking about the bike shed. It's like, it's fine, this is cleanup, but the real issue is like item 4. And so I just feel like I don't really know exactly where to engage on which parts of these until we get to item 4.
Would it be out of line to hear item 2, item 3, item 4 separately and then make motions after we've heard everything, or?
That seems like a very confusing way to do it. I mean,
Oh,
you
okay.
can at your meeting, but this particular amendment, this first one seems much more clear and simple than others that are coming up.
Yeah.
And I don't have a problem with it because I don't feel like it's saying anything new. It's not making any new
I agree
rules.
with you. It's policy wise, it's exactly what it currently is. It's just cleaner. So I totally agree. But I'm just, it's sort of like, do we talk about the bigger thing? Because we're kind of dancing around it. That's the awkwardness that I'm feeling is all I'm saying. But if we want to just very much constrain it to this, that's good.
I'd be inclined to, one, since we've read an agenda, I think I do want to have a vote on it. As far as taking items out of, in a different order, you're suggesting reading item number 4 next into.
I think that's the most substantial one that sort of the other ones are sort of circling around the orbit of.
Maybe Miss Daly could explain to us why the changes are being recommended? Like, is it just for enforcement or is it because they want to change the way things are unfolding, maybe?
Which items specifically?
Like if I look at and show me if I'm wrong, but basically it's like the city council is recommending to pull back the reforms that were made 2 years ago on ADUs. And these are a series of things we can do to make it easier to enforce, because one of the primary arguments that were made against this change was that you're going to have a lot more ADUs out of compliance if you make it harder to get a legal ADU.
Well, the second kitchen is purely, like I said, it's not a substantive changes. That was a recommendation that came straight from code enforcement. They asked us to do that. That wasn't even on our radar to do. Item 2, that is from the council, and that actually expands ADUs. They're not called ADUs in our code, and they are treated a little different. That's actually ADU expansion. 3 is a cleanup and enforcement, something that was already happening in administrative process, but council wanted it in a legislative code amendment. So that's what number 3 is. And then 4 is just a policy decision that the council made to change the special use permit process. So that's kind of like the background on all, I don't know, I can clarify that more, but.
If I could, I think these are pretty straightforward. Looking through them, most of these are just like very minor tweaks to language. The 4th one is the most substantial to actual policy. My feeling is, just so we can get through these quickly, I think it would be fine just to go through 1, 2, 3, and 4. Just, most of them are pretty small. So.
And then maybe at the end of our discussion, if we feel like this isn't actually the solution and we have a different problem that we feel like, maybe we could just pass that along to the council.
That's great. I really support that. I just didn't want us to sort of be dancing around number 4 all through items 1, 2, and 3. But if we're all aligned, let's just go through 1, 2, and 3 and then get to the discussion of 4. I think that'll make the meeting more efficient. That's
Okay. We need to do a little straw poll on this, or are we good?
I think we're good.
We haven't
Okay.
changed anything.
I'm getting
Yep.
3 comments saying just to continue in the order we have them. With that in mind, we kind of left off with a motion and then there was some discussion, but go ahead.
Yeah, I'll make a motion on item number 1. Provo City Council Office requests an ordinance text amendment to section 14.34.440, second kitchen and 1 family dwellings to clarify and update standards, citywide application. I move that we recommend approval of this proposed amendment to the city council.
I'll second that.
Any discussion on the motion? Let's go ahead and vote on it then. Commissioner Shin.
Aye.
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 Okay, item number 1 is recommended for approval 5-0. Item number 2. Provo City Council Office requests an ordinance text amendment to section 14.34.450 elderly persons extra living space to update the age of applicability from 65 years old to 60 years old. Citywide application, Leah Daly presenting.
Perfect. The title is really what this is. So the only change we're making here is in the elderly person's extra living space section of code. We're changing the minimum age from 65 to 60, so lowering that. So I can explain that more, but that's
Yeah.
Lowering the standard has been discussed by staff for years.
Yeah, I'll ask just generally what was the discussion of staff on that? Just to capture a broader swath
Yes,
of people who
opinion of the
would be in
planning
need.
Staff was to lower it, and there had even been discussions to go even below 60, but we're happy to have this change.
That would be my question is why is it at 60 and not even lower?
yeah. So that was a discussion that the council had in their work meeting. They threw out a bunch of ages and they all talked about that, and 60 got the votes. So that was a policy decision by them.
But
I have questions.
Is there a separate this isn't even part of what's on the agenda or item, but is there a separate provision for disabled people?
Not that I'm aware of.
Yeah, it's called reasonable accommodation. Yes, you go through a reasonable accommodation process. There's a hearing officer that's an attorney, and that's how you accomplish that for a person with special needs.
Commissioner Jensen.
You don't have anything to present beyond what you said? Okay. I just have a few questions to make sure I understand what
Okay.
this allows.
Yes.
On 2B, it says that the person has to own and continuously occupy the one family dwelling where the extra living space is located. And we've talked about this before in ADU discussions. What if they leave temporarily, like happens often in that demographic in this city?
That
Is it-
is provided later. I don't know if it's in this section, but later on there are, I don't know what section it's in, but there are like, temporary leave of absence provided in code later.
Do you think
That's what
maybe it
else?
would be useful to refer to that when you're talking about this has to happen, just because that's such a common question that will arise in this age group?
Yes, that would be helpful, but I believe it's already like linked to this.
I would just say like refer to section blah, blah, blah of the code. I
That's a
wouldn't put
good
any more words in there.
Suggestion, yes.
The other thing is number 5. Let me just reread my notes here. Extra space within the dwelling may thereafter be occupied by not more than 2 additional persons over 18 years old and their minor children. How long and how can you be sure that this doesn't turn into a short-term rental? Like, is there any provision on here about if I'm a senior and I have turned my basement into an apartment legally and I want to rent it to a different person every month? Like,
Well,
how do you,
I
I don't see any
imagine-
language in here that regulates the duration.
I imagine that would be treated the same as any other rental property where short-term rentals are prohibited in residential areas throughout the city. So like any other residential property or any other ADU, if that does happen, then the city can enforce on that through their normal process.
So do they still fill out the same rental application that you referenced is item 5?
For elderly persons, yes, but it is elderly person's extra living space is not a ADU specifically, but they still have to get an RDL.
Okay.
So they still have to abide by all the RDL standards.
So my suggestion would be that would be very likely to be something that gets abused. Not in an intentional abuse, but because there's a misunderstanding. I just know of a few. So I think that if you have the language in here so that when somebody comes in and says, I'm over 60, I want to convert my apartment legally, I want to, have an apartment legally, that they understand with a few different sentences, bullet points, whatever, that's one of the things that's required, that it has to be a long-term dwelling, not a short-term dwelling.
Okay.
Maybe if there was like language that said read in conjunction with this code section and that code section. Yeah, something like
It's just,
that.
I mean, if it refers to something else, point them to it.
I mean, that's all included in the RDL in the
Yeah.
RDL section of code, what the requirements are for RDL. That's all
Okay.
explained in that section. So they do have to go through that process already.
Okay.
But we could make that more explicit here.
Because it seemed like that was something in the staff report in one of these that said we want people to be able to come in and understand exactly what they're signing up for. And I feel like that's something that would be useful. My last question is number 9. It says the mayor may adopt any regulation which the mayor deems necessary to enforce the provisions of this section. Does that mean the mayor can change anything at will, or does it still need to go through the planning commission and municipal council?
Well, that's a provision that's in all of our code when we pass a code, is that just the administrative process and administrative rules, once the code is passed, then that's on their end. It says mayor, but that's usually, that means or
The
delegate.
administration.
Yeah, the administration can make rules and process for how they carry out the code.
Okay. Just making sure it wasn't some random
No,
mayor had a special thing for
We're
elderly
good.
and wants to be able to tell them what they can and can't do. Okay.
No, it sounds like it's just a procedural, like
yes,
procedurally.
that's just like
administrative
template
enforcement.
boilerplate language that goes with code.
I think this is great. I would even go lower, but this is what was before us, so it's great.
I have a question. This is just from my understanding. I don't want to get into the weeds on this. I think this is a good change, and it's really simple here. Just with regards to this as being a provision for elderly people. Generally, like age is considered a protected class, right? How just like from a legal standpoint, how does this fly for us to be able to like extend or withdraw like property rights based on age? Is that something that has been discussed? I'm just curious, like to understand what our standing is on being able to do this.
Yeah, that was a question that was brought up in the council meeting as well. Just like if we kept going lower or higher, are we entering into legal challenges? Legal has assured us that we are fine because it's not taking away rights based on age. It's granting rights, and also, yeah, I'm gonna end there, but yes, we're good.
That makes me think of another question. What if, as is common today, you have a couple over the age of 60 and they still have 2 or 3 kids living with them? Are they still allowed to create another apartment?
Yes.
Okay.
Anyone else? Thanks. Yeah, let's go ahead and open this up for public comment. Is there a district chair? This is citywide, but any district chairs citywide here to offer a comment? Okay, how about members of the public? Any members of the public want to comment on expanding the definition of elderly person age? I see none. We'll go ahead and close the public comment portion of the hearing. For this item. Further discussion? Commissioner members? Does anyone want to make a motion? I'll go ahead and make a motion. I recommend that we approve, or I'm sorry, or
For the positive recommendation.
approve for positive recommendation to Provo City Council's request for an ordinance text amendment to section 14.34.450 elderly persons extra living space to update the age of applicability from 65 years old to 60 years old, citywide application.
I'll second.
Second. Any discussion on the motion? Should we go ahead and vote? Commissioner Shin?
Aye.
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 Okay, item number 2 is recommended for approval. 5-0. Item number 3. Provo City Council Office requests ordinance text amendments to sections 6.02.080 license suspension or revocation, 14 .06.02.020 definitions, and 14.30.030 accessory dwelling unit development standards to update and clarify standards related to ADUs, citywide application. Staff member Malia Daly.
Perfect. Okay. So this one, I'll give a background on this. Currently, when someone goes in to apply for an RDL for an ADU, as part of that process, they sign an affidavit saying this will be owner occupied. And then as administrative staff is reviewing the application, if they feel that they would like further proof or they want to inspect that, then they'll ask for further documentation or an in-person inspection for the owner occupancy. Council, after discussions, decided that instead of it being an administrative thing that they check and instead of just the signed affidavit, they also wanted in code as part of that license application process for ADUs for people to have to provide documentation for proof of owner occupancy. And after review of the initial draft, then legal and code enforcement and planning staff came up with really good additions to also include some language that specify for LLC ownerships, because code enforcement has a hard time sometimes with owner occupancy requirements if it's within an LLC that property is. So that's what these amendments are here. Substantively, administrative staff was already taking the affidavit of people saying it would be owner occupied and still reviewing and getting proof of that in some cases. But council just wanted to add it into the code so it was upfront and part of the application process. So this reviews a couple chapters and sections. This is legal drafted most of this and planning staff. So I will help where I can, but I am not good about how, and they decided what kind of documentation to use there. Code enforcement really helped with that. If you see under C, all the list of documentation types, code enforcement and legal came up with that list together. Council kind of deferred to them and said, you're the experts and please let us know what would be best there. But this touches a couple sections of code. So the development standards and then the definition of owner occupant and primary residence, and then licensing, which is in chapter 6.
Anyone have any questions? Is that it? Is that it?
Yep, that's all
Sorry.
I have.
Yeah, so just so I understand, essentially previously when you, as part of the getting the RDL, there was not an explicit requirement to validate that the person requesting lived in the property. And so we're adding that.
Correct. There was language that they had to sign an affidavit that said, I will follow.
But wasn't verification.
No.
It was purely just an
Yes.
attestation.
Yes.
And the reason for going in this direction is essentially we're trying, and RDLs have to be renewed every year, correct?
Correct.
So essentially we're saying as long as a property has an ADU, that property must be owner occupied.
Correct.
And we're going to essentially enforce this on a yearly basis.
Yes.
Thank you.
I have one comment / recommendation on the LLCs. So this is 14.06.020 subsection C. Maybe if you could put another subsection III
Mhm.
with a percentage shareholder, members of the LLC, each percentage they have. At least for people, because I think sometimes the LLCs can obfuscate like who really owns it or controls it. That's just a recommendation.
And just to build off that, you're basically saying the workaround here is
Put as many people.
I have
as
an
possible.
LLC. I give each of my tenants a 0.00001% ownership of my LLC, and now therefore they're in compliance. Is that what you're saying? Because I think that would be a valid
For
workaround.
me, it's just a transparency thing.
I need you to sign this
Generally.
operating agreement and this rental agreement. Now you're a 100,000th owner of my LLC. I mean, it's how it's a great point. You could get around this
Yeah.
that way. So every LLC owner has to live?
Yes.
Interesting. So under this, I couldn't, for example, I'm a young kid out of college. I want help buying a home. I form an LLC with my father, buy a house with an ADU so it can help assist with the rent. I can't do that now under this rule.
No.
I think that's right.
Yeah.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
I think it's a
Well,
bad thing.
I think that doesn't encourage owner occupancy because they're
Yeah.
going to need help sometimes.
I mean, explicitly, I know people who do this is they form an LLC with a family member as a way to help get in, own a house, get in the house.
The problem we've had is that the LLC names 4 children and the children each live in it, the house one at a time. This is trying to close that loophole. So there've been hours and hours of meetings with enforcement and council office and council members trying to figure out ways to make enforcement easier because we're constantly being criticized that our enforcement over illegal occupancy is not vigilant enough. So that's what's driving a lot of this.
Are those challenges of enforcing illegal occupancy? It seems like there's a lot bigger fish to fry, what I'm saying. Like, I'm not sure that that's the piece that's really holding us up from enforcement on illegal occupancies. Is that a fair assumption?
Well,
That one piece of the LC.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with that. But it is a significant piece. I mean, there's a whole lot of loopholes people are taking advantage of or things that they've stressed us on or stressed the system on. But LLCs is certainly one of them. That's something that has been abused.
because as you ask that, I wonder about unlicensed violations because I would bet that most of the over occupancy problems in the city are not the people who have rental dwelling licenses. They didn't do any of these things that they were supposed to do, and they have too many people living
That
in the
would be
house.
my 100% guess. Like by far, it's probably
So
not
I
even
feel
close.
like this is great that we're polishing up the language, but it's not actually addressing the problem, which is people aren't even going through these steps and they're just creating illegal apartments everywhere. So it doesn't matter how many people are on their LLC or whether they're owner occupied because they aren't doing it legally in the first place. Not even trying to.
I agree, but
So I think the
Some
cleanups are
parts.
great. I just wonder if it's the problem, if we're solving
Well,
the real problem.
But that's my problem. And I promised I wouldn't say anything about number 4. But in this particular case, what you're now doing is you're just creating another incentive to not comply. And a very strong incentive, which is fine. I understand at least the general incentive, which is we want people to live in the ADUs. I get it. But yeah, it's a very big push away from non-compliance generally with this whole item, and now even more specifically with the LLC thing for sure.
I see what you mean with that, but it seems like that's not a persuasive enough argument for me to not.
I'm not
have
saying we
the
should
law
go
or the
against.
ordinances there because we're just going to push them to be scofflaws.
But what I get it. So I'm not making that point against this entire item, but specifically, I have an issue with the LLC. I really do, because now you're taking away one thing which someone could in spirit want to comply. And now you're saying, well, this plan that I had to sort of work with you to just.
What if you put a 50% thing?
That's
on it?
what I
At
was
least
going to ask. Why we
50%
didn't
of the
say
LLC,
50%
of the people in the
plus.
LLC would have to live there. And then you could get that dad helping with a mortgage without going into, I've assigned 20 different people in my LLC and one of them's living there at a time. It would keep it down a little bit. Mr. Pepperoni looks like he has something to say.
Because it's an ordinance amendment, I think you need to vote up or down
I'll
the
vote-
ordinance
yeah,
amendment and then
yeah.
make whatever
Feedback.
suggestions you think you would like to make.
Okay.
That's fair. And to be clear, I think this is good because this is what I was going to get to earlier, is like the question, the reason why this exists is because the big problem with ADUs is they turn into illegal duplexes. And I'm sure this is what the city's trying to avoid would be my guess. Is that correct?
Yes.
So I'm supportive of the item, but I do think that we want to accommodate as many spirit of the law, compliance as we should, is the argument I'm trying to make.
I have a question for Miss Daly. We chased her away with our discussion.
Sorry.
Okay.
On bottom of page 3 of the staff report, II says, in such event, the dwelling unit must nevertheless be the domicile of the trustor during the trustor's temporary absence. So I think that that's saying if the person that owns the residence is sick in a rehab facility, it still has to be considered their main residence, even though they're not living there, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So if they're absent due to illness, can someone else new live there also? Or does it need to stay empty because it's their residence?
I'm not sure, but I can go back and ask legal on that before we go to a council meeting.
Yeah, I would just make sure that we're not making some requirement that's unrealistic.
Yeah, that's fair.
And then the only other thing I had was page 7, item D. You list the forms of verification that they have to show annually, and that list is not as inclusive as the original one. Is that an oversight, or is it actually
On which,
page 7, item D? So
Maybe just
I don't
reference the
know.
list above, right?
yeah, I
Re-reference
feel
that
like you
list.
don't actually need to relist these.
Yeah.
You can just reference the previous list and item blah, blah, blah. Which,
okay,
what is
I get
it?
What you're saying.
Item,
Primary residence definition, and then
and then it lists
potential evidence,
C.
C.
C,
potential
I through
evidence.
X,
Yeah,
because it's not the same list there. So I didn't know if it didn't need to be the same list, or if it's maybe redundant and you don't even need to put it there and just
Okay.
refer back to the other one.
Yeah,
That would
I'll-
just, since we're trying to clean things
Yeah.
up and make them easier, that was the one thing I thought that
Yes.
might simplify a little bit.
Thank
Make them
you.
the same.
Well,
I'm done.
I have a question, just to sorry.
let me, if you don't mind me going first, Director Pepperoni, if one of us doesn't feel comfortable approving this as is until we see some of these changes, is it more appropriate to just deny the ordinance text amendment until we see those changes, or do we hope they get changed before they get to city council or incorporated?
If you're that uncomfortable, then you either continue it and ask for some, well, you shouldn't continue it and ask for something to be brought back, because you shouldn't be amending what's being presented before you. So vote it down then.
Commissioner Whitlock.
I have a question just to make sure I'm understanding something. So hypothetical happens in our community sometimes. I go on a mission. I go, I'm 65 years old. I get called on a mission. I have my younger kids come live in the house. There was an ADU. I had it there. Would that become non-compliant and be unable to get a rental dwelling license?
the extra living space, previously we talked about temporary absence, that is still allowed, that someone can live there and
Okay.
we still have the extra living space, so that's still okay.
Okay, even if they're not living there. Because I'm gone for 2 years.
Who's not?
So I'm a 65-year-old old in a home. I go on a 2-year mission.
Yeah,
And
and
I'm no longer
then your
living there.
kids come in and move, and then the apartment is still being rented under.
Yeah, correct,
We're
correct.
good.
So
Okay,
all
good.
of these owner occupied LLC, whatever, don't apply when it's just a temporary leave of absence.
The temporary leave of absence just applies to the elderly person's extra living
Oh,
space,
okay,
which isn't
okay.
specifically an ADU.
But if
So
it's
if I'm
an,
a 55-year-old, I get called extra young to be a mission president, would I be out of compliance?
Yeah, because that's an ADU, not an extra. living
Okay, I'm just
space.
trying to understand the boundary conditions of these things.
Yeah, there's nuance there for sure.
I have a question with the, on page 4, there's some verbiage here. There's this list of, evidence that can be used to establish owner occupancy. And it's the wording of, it says, it is not necessary to provide every type of evidence listed in this section to establish residency, nor does providing every type of evidence listed definitively establish residency if other evidence exists that calls residency into question. Potential evidence may include but is not limited to, and then this list here, which includes at the very end, like an affidavit and written statements of those having knowledge. It feels like this is really, really kind of vague in terms of what this is saying and isn't saying, you know? Like this is a list of things that may or may not be used as evidence, that may or may not be a complete list. And, you know, I'm just trying to understand, because it seems like that gives a lot of latitude and puts the ball in the court of the city just to kind of like make a judgment call. Is that correct? Like, am I understanding that what this effectively means?
If you don't mind me trying to answer that, I think that the language it kind of turns on section B of that. If other evidence exists that calls residency into question. So someone enforcement or whoever would have to present evidence questioning the validity of all items, 1 through I or X. Right? Is that?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I think, like I said, the council made this motion and then left legal and code enforcement to draft it in a way that they thought would be best for them and to be able to enforce it. But then also, since they're administration and they can kind of have process and rules to figure that out, we didn't want it to be so specific that they were confined to certain things that they have to have and they can't use other things. So I haven't asked legal and code enforcement on this language. We just reviewed it and said, if you guys think this is going to be effective and useful for you, then we're good with this. So I will have to clarify with legal and code enforcement on this language specifically, but I imagine it is written in a way that they deemed it would be most useful for them. And that way they could still have some leeway and make sure that they're able to enforce on what all of these are aiming to do.
Okay.
I think the trick here that something I'm feeling a bit uncomfortable with, while agreeing with the goal of what we're trying to do here is like, there's not, and again, maybe this goes back to the mayor point you made later, but like, it's sort of like, here's this list of things you could kind of potentially do to prove that you own this thing if we doubt that you own it, but there's no mention of process of like, this will be reviewed by this department and you'll have a hearing. It's just like, I just, as a member of the community, kind of feel a little uncomfortable like reading this, because it's just like someone could question whether or not this is my primary residence, and then I could submit a ton of documents and it's going to go into some bureaucratic thing that's very unspecified here, and someone may decide I'm not living here full time, and then I can't live in my home anymore, or I have to tear out half of it because it's an ADU. That's kind of the implication.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I would say that's the case with all of our like RDLs and code enforcement right now, is that the code doesn't specify every process and what's going to happen if you're in violation of a code. That's kind of something that's.
But it's kind of, but the ADU thing is different, because if I own a property and it's just my investment property and I get my RDL, denied or whatever, I can sell it. I don't have to move my whole family because now I'm living in this thing illegally. Like, that's the weird thing about an ADU, is like, you're basically making it illegal for the place I live to live.
Yes.
Which is weird. It's very different than a rental property, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think Commissioner Whitlock sums up my thoughts on that too. Just from the perspective of, I can understand the idea behind it, and I don't assume that the city would try to go out of its way to be like, intentionally Kafkaesque about like how we deal with this, but it feels a little bit that way. Just like reading this as if I was an applicant, I'd be like, this does not feel very clear how I prove that I'm above the board and I'm doing this legally. It feels like there's just a lot of the way it says, like, any of these or none of these, or they're not all sufficient. It just feels like there should be stronger language of like how, I don't know, how you actually say like, yes, this is how you can say this,
or the process and how it would be determined. It's the combination of the two that's tough for me.
Any other questions for Staff Member Daly?
I found one more.
Go ahead.
Top of page 3, license suspension or revocation. It says a city may suspend or revoke a rental dwelling business license. Is that just supposed to say rental dwelling license? Or is it actually a business license? It's just not referred to as a business license anywhere else. It's just called an RDL.
Well, this is in chapter 6. So this has to do with licenses throughout the city, this whole chapter and section. So this does include, so this section is about rental dwelling licenses and business licenses.
Okay, it just says rental dwelling business license, so that isn't a thing, is it?
Well, rental dwelling licenses are technically a type of business license, so I
Okay.
think maybe just in this section, they're being more
Okay,
specific there.
I just wanted to make sure that wasn't confusing
Yeah.
because it's not called that anywhere else.
That is fair.
And I want to say something. I'm not putting you on the hot seat at all. You're doing an
You're-
amazing job.
You're fine. This
I
is
just
not
want to
the
make clear,
hot seat.
it's not
We're
like
good.
we're not grilling you. Sorry.
We're
It's
good.
just trying to understand what's going on here.
I've been doing ADU since 2021.
So you've been,
we're good.
you've been in the
Yeah.
thick of it.
This is fine.
Do we need to do public comment on this?
Yeah, we do need, unless anyone has any other questions, and then we could discuss it later more. Thank you, Emilia. We'll go ahead and open this up for public comment. Are there any district chairs present? No district chairs? Any members from the public to comment present on item number 3? I'm not seeing anyone make a move. So we'll go ahead and close the public comment portion. Commissioners, further discussion on this?
I have some
Commissioner
ideas.
Jensen?
I feel like what this is pointing out to me or teaching me is that the ADUs are the tool to use up to age 60. And after that, these rules wouldn't apply and you would instead get the elderly one that we already talked about. So some of my concerns about timing and age and absence go away with that. And then the other thing that I noted was the real problem is the unlicensed violations. So if we were to pass something on to the, like, if we were to approve or deny this, but we would additionally say, City Council, we want you to address this problem perhaps. And then to pass on to the City Council that maybe they want to talk about 50% LLC occupancy just to not discourage people from having a shared burden of finance. Those are the notes I took just to sort of encapsulate what I was learning from our discussion.
Yeah, I'm just putting my cards on the table, not feeling, I totally agree with what the city is trying to do. I think it's a very worthy goal. I feel uncomfortable with the LLC requirement and I feel uncomfortable with the current way to prove ownership, given that essentially this is the place you're living. And if, because the place you live has an ADU, it's very unclear how to prove that you have the right to live in the home you live in. I don't feel comfortable with that. It feels very much like a press against private property rights that I don't like.
I'm kind of slightly inclined to not recommend approval for different reasons, but
What are your reasons?
a little bit along with what you're saying, Commissioner Jensen, with number of LLC occupants, percentage ownership is one of my things. That's probably it. Does anyone want to put forward a motion? Or do we need a little bit more discussion?
Is anyone super supportive of this?
I actually am supportive of this. I don't think it addresses the problem, but I don't have a problem with this as far as putting a Band-Aid on it till they, addressing the problem they can address. Because the unlicensed one is a tricky one to handle anyway. So I don't have a problem with this. I would definitely recommend that they do something to change the wording of the LLC, things that we've talked about, just so that it doesn't make it so somebody can't do that. But otherwise, I feel like it's a good tool and it seems to cover the things that are most important.
But just so I understand procedurally, the recommendation is we can't like forward with conditional, it's more just deny or with feedback.
Well, if you make a recommendation for denial, it'd be really helpful to the city council to understand those reasons why you weren't comfortable with this proposal. If you recommend approval, but have some concerns, go ahead and state what those concerns are.
What's better to say, we recommend approval, but we really, really want you to change this language, or we recommend denial unless you change this language?
I prefer a
The
denial.
second is more powerful.
Is that still
Totally
useful
up-
to
totally
pass
up to-
along? Okay.
totally up to the planning commission.
I think is our discretion as planning commission.
Mr. South, you haven't said anything. I want to know how you feel about the LLC discussion. Is that a hang up for you?
I'm just putting myself in the position that I'm in currently with my own children and thinking like we would want to do, because we've done something similar in other locations, and I think we'd want to have something there that allows them to stay there. I think even the ownership percentage at 50% would be too high, because I'm not going to buy something with my kids and have them own the majority of it if I'm fronting all the cash. So I think that is a little bit of a hang up for me. The bigger issue though, for me, I think, is this annual declaration of owner occupancy. And I'm being persuaded that, some of the nebulousness of how we do that could be called into question by someone else, if other evidence exists that calls residency into question. So does that mean anybody at any time could call this into question? Now I'm back down at the city offices trying to demonstrate that I do in fact live there, and what just that would get old pretty quick.
No, you're not wrong. I mean, someone could submit surveillance on you.
I mean,
showing that you
like,
never
for
entered the
example,
property.
like I spend a few months every year in another country, just something we do to learn Spanish as a family. I don't know. It's like someone's like, oh, is he living there now? It's like, no, I'm back. Granted, I don't live in a home with the ADU, but it just sounds, I would want that process to be very, very obvious on how I would be able to prove that I live
My
there.
problem with that is that if you make it really obvious, then somebody knows exactly how to subvert it. Like if you say, unless you're out of the country learning a language for,
No, I'm not
obviously
saying
you wouldn't
but
be
I'm
that
just saying,
specific,
like,
but
approve
fair.
these documents.
then they'll
XYZ,
say, I only
and-
have to live there for 9 months because I can say I'm on sabbatical the other
But
three.
that
and-
is the rule, right? It's 50% or more. So you could be out of the city for 5 months every year, and that's your primary residence, and it's legal.
Okay, well then you don't have to worry about.
I'm
your-
just
your-
saying the way that it's the law, the way it's written is that if someone suggests that you might not be there, now it triggers this thing where you have to prove that you live where you live.
Doesn't that cause a problem anyway if you only have to be there 50% of the time? I mean, that just seems like a nightmare for enforcement anyway. Anyone can call at any time and say, these renters that I didn't want in my neighborhood anyway are
Yeah.
skipping the country and they haven't mowed their lawn the whole summer.
I do take care of my lawn while I'm out, though.
Not everyone does.
I know.
And that's why I like the restrictions and I like the checkpoints. I don't think that the enforcement officers are going to be trying to kick you out if you've gone through all the process and they can tell, they get calls, they know. Because I worry about the people that are trying to buck the system, not you. I worry about those that the reason there's a rule that it's owner occupied is so that it doesn't have high turnover and so that it's not a neglected property and it doesn't distract from the neighborhood. So I'm okay with the rules because it kind of creates a safeguard, even though it's complicated.
I'll throw a thought, closing thought. I have a lot of, my wife and I have lived with my parents as a married couple in the past. We've lived with her parents for a while. I have siblings right now, or I have a sibling who's married, who's living in my parents' basement right now. My wife's sister and her husband and their baby are living with their grandparents right now, all around the valley, different places. Nobody has ever, when people do this, I don't think, I just, none of them have ever applied for a license for any of that. They just do it,
You just reported your whole family.
I know, but they don't live in Provo.
Wait, but
It's
they're
other
family
juris-
though.
That's all legal.
That is
It's
okay.
legal.
Yeah.
Okay.
Even if they
Okay.
don't eat their meals together, even if they have a separate apartment in that second kitchen. That's where I thought the hangup was, that you have to technically
Yeah, because I
be
lived in
residing as a family.
I lived in my in-laws when my wife was getting her MBA at BYU and I was starting my business and I was an entrepreneur and paying myself nothing. I lived in their basement with a separate kitchen for 2 years while she got her MBA, and I'm pretty sure we were non-compliant. I don't know. I didn't know as much about city law at that time, but
Bill, I cut you off. What were you going to say?
Adam's, Mr. Shin's scenario suggested living under one home with one kitchen. As soon as you create a separate dwelling unit, that's where it starts to become much more complicated.
Mm.
But the point was, a family is defined as being related by blood, marriage, or adoption. So the scenarios he mentioned are all defined as family.
Yeah.
Okay, I guess I'll retract my point then. It doesn't apply to this so specifically.
Can I make a motion? We can just see where we land on this.
Yeah, any other discussion before I
Hmm, I'm discussed out. I'm disgusted.
okay. Yeah, go ahead, Commissioner Chairman Whitlock.
I make a motion that the Planning Commission forward a negative recommendation to the Provo City Council for item number 3. Provo City Council requests ordinance text amendments to section 60208, 1406020, and 143030 to update and clarify standards related to ADUs. And along with that motion would give the feedback around concern around the LLC provision in order to accommodate parents helping their children with homeownership, and around the vagueness of how you actually prove that you live in your home as a primary residence.
Do we need to state that as a recommended denial, or is it okay to say forward a negative recommendation for approval?
Board of negative recommendation.
Okay, that's fine.
I'd like, as part of a discussion on that motion, I'd just like to add a concern that, or another bullet point on that, just to see a percentage of ownership on the LLCs as a reason for not recommending approval. Anyone else want to add anything to that? Maybe.
I think those are the two. It's the LLC ownership as a percent in order to accommodate home ownership through parents and children. And then the second is proof of ownership.
So are there 2 items on the LLC piece? One is a disclosure and one is a minimum threshold that that ought to be considered?
Right.
Okay.
The disclosure is not under the LLC though. That's just saying I live here. That's just
Yeah.
residence.
Yeah, it's just
appro-
disclosure.
Proof of
Well,
residence.
I'm trying to get to your
we
point.
both are. I would second Commissioner Chairman Whitlock's motion, but I just want to add
Yeah, adding
a
some sort of
reason
percent.
as-
Yeah,
Okay.
got it.
for the negative vote.
Got it. Yep. And do we want to add a specific percent, or just say that, some sort of percent that accommodates this scenario better?
Leave it open.
Yeah, agreed.
Is there a second on the motion?
I'll second the motion.
Okay, let's, this is on a recommendation for denial.
Okay, I have a question before we vote.
Go ahead.
I agree with the LLC concerns, but I also wouldn't be sad if this passed as it was, just because it's still so. That wouldn't be, I'm not sending the
You
wrong
think there's
message
a
if I
bigger
vote for it,
policy
if I vote
problem?
against this.
You
Okay.
should vote
Okay.
against it.
I'm just making sure that it's not saying I love everything about it just because would be okay with it if it passed as it was. Okay. Thank you for holding my hand through the process.
Let's go ahead and vote. It was on a recommendation
Do you
for
wanna-
denial. Commissioner Shin?
Aye.
Nay.
Aye.
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 Denial of item number 3 is recommended. Denials
4-1.
4-1. Item number 4, Provo City Council Office requests an ordinance text amendment to section 14.30.040 special use permit for accessory dwelling unit to remove previous legislation and replace it with new standards, citywide application.
Okay. Here's the big ticket item, everyone. Here we go. Okay, so if you remember in 2022, if you were on the planning commission, we did a lot of amendments to chapter 1430, one of which was the special use permit process. I won't give the whole history of that, but I can if you want me to later. What this is doing, if you remember in this process currently, we called it the pathway process. There's two pathways in order to get an ADU for your property if you were not in a zone that already allows it. So the first way was an administrative process. So as a single property, you could go to immediate properties next to you, and if you got 66% of the immediate properties next to you that said if they were okay with you having an ADU, then you could turn that application into planning staff and they would say, okay, you get a permit, not a land use permission, but a permit for you as the property owner to allow to have an ADU while you're living at the house. That was the first pathway. The second pathway was for multiple property owners, or it could be one property owner, but multiple contiguous properties could come together and say, we also want ADUs in this area, or we want to allow them in this area. And they could go and get the 66% signatures as well of immediate properties of their contiguous area. And then they would still have to go, though, to Planning Commission and the council, which we just saw one of these earlier this year. And they would go and say, we got signatures of 66%. There's a majority of people around us and our group. We want ADUs to be allowed. And this is a land use decision, not a permit that runs with those property owners, but instead this is an ordinance text amendment that changes the land use of those properties. And now those properties are allowed to have an ADU. But one thing about this, if they did get the signatures, they still had to go through the normal land use process, going to Planning Commission and Council, and the council could deny their application still. So those were the two pathways. The proposed amendment before you here gets rid of the single use property, so the administrative process, and keeps the multiple properties. So it gets rid of one of the pathways of the two pathways and just allows people to apply for an ordinance text amendment with the signatures and doesn't allow for the single properties to then get an administrative process and get a permit just for themselves for the duration of them owning that property and living there. So that is the proposed ordinance here. We also added clarification at the advice of legal that even if someone does go through the process and get their 66 signatures, the contiguous properties, they still have to go through the rezone, not the rezone, but the land use allowance process. And they can still be denied even if they did get their signatures. So that was a clarification that we added because of the process, the application we had earlier this year. That was a point of confusion for people. That's all.
So to help me understand this, so if you are a single property owner, you still have a pathway to get an ADU. Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
So before we created the pathways, you could always apply for an ordinance text amendment to get a rezone for your property to then become a zone that allowed an ADU, or you could get a land use. We have a map in 1430 that you could be added to that map to be allowed to have ADUs, which is what this pathway is here. But you can still do that as a single property owner, and you could do that before the pathways, and you still can. Just getting rid of this additional way.
When you say a map, is that a ADU zone overlay? Is that
It's
what
not
is that exactly?
technically an overlay. It's not an overlay. It is a map that are the remnants of an overlay that existed before it was repealed in 2021.
But it does reflect every property that has been by right allowed to have ADUs, which
Yes.
is what this is basically saying is instead of having some be administrative, we want all of it to go through Planning Commission and Municipal Council as a zone change.
Yes, not even, this process, it doesn't have to be a zone change, so you don't have to, so currently if you go through the zone change process, you're basically asking to allow for higher density because you are doing a zone change and most of the ADU allowed zones have higher density. So this doesn't do a zone change to your property, it just allows it as a permitted use on your specific property and then recorded into 1430.
Okay, I was envisioning it like it was a zone overlay, like he was
And-
saying.
Yeah.
And
not
that,
zone overlay.
that process is 66 signatures from 66% of the adjacent property owners
Yes,
and planning commission and city council approval.
yes.
But what I read in here, you don't have to have the 66%.
No,
You can go
you
without
could-
it. That's just like to help your case, right?
Yes, it is just to help your case and kind of have an argument to say,
And the route we're getting
Yes.
rid of is the by right ADUs by getting 66% of adjacent property owners and through
Not-
administration process.
not a by right, it would be a special use permit for that specific property owner, and it would go
Oh,
away
for
as
that
soon as
property
they
owner.
sold the
Got it.
property.
And
Yes.
but that's an administrative process where if you just met the requirement of 66%, you would get.
Yes,
And that was just the signatures also too, correct?
correct. And then also, they would also have to meet all of the normal ADU development standards and RDL requirements and all of that, but yes.
I have a question. So I kind of educated myself on some of the city council discussion before this and if I'm getting anything wrong, please correct me here, but it seemed like staff's prior to the city council vote, staff's sort of push or recommendation was to actually make the permit process maybe easier, like 50%. And that was staff's recommendation. Now, post council meeting, it seems like now the staff is proposing to recommending that we support this. So I'm wondering like what changed? Can you just explain some of the rationale there?
Yeah, so staff's recommendation, council staff recommendation, ours was the 50% came from us and development services. So planning staff, we recommended 50%, or to keep the status quo. We also present as council staff, we have to present all the possible options there. And one of those options is to repeal, which was discussed on the council. So we wanted to explore that as well. And the council chose to do a halfway repeal. So this is council's recommendation and what they have proposed.
Okay. Got it. It makes sense. So this is the recommendation on our item number 4, that's council staff's recommendation. It's not necessarily planning or the broader.
Yeah, it's the
Administration.
council's proposed
Okay.
change.
Thank you for
Yes.
clarifying that.
Yep.
Can I ask a couple questions?
Mhm.
How many applications have there been for the special use permit since it was allowed?
I should have looked at this. I have the numbers. The special use permit, I believe we're in like the low 30s, I think, since it was passed in 2022.
Is that for the individual property one that's approved
Yeah.
administratively?
Yep.
Yes,
And how many, so that's how many applications?
yes.
And how many were approved versus denied?
The large majority were approved. I don't have the exact, I mean, I do have the exact numbers, but not here with me,
Sure.
but large majority were approved. There were some denied and then some were closed and didn't go forward with it, either because they didn't get the signatures or they didn't meet the development standards and the RDL requirements once they got into it.
And so do you have any indication on the numbers that actually transpired into an ADU that were applied, approved, and went forward?
I don't have those numbers. I could
Okay.
ask if code enforcement has those, but I don't know. Once we grant a license, I don't think we track. I don't know,
Okay,
maybe we
sure.
do, but I'm not
That's
sure.
fair.
Can I ask a related question? How many applications went through the current path that would be left standing?
The text amendment application,
One,
just the one that we saw briefly.
yes.
How about the by right rental dwelling licenses for ADUs? Do we have a number on how many
The
people are
by-
actually using the process? The ones that are in the zones that are allowed to have an ADU by right, that don't have to ask for special permission?
Oh, how many ADU licenses we
Yeah,
have?
how many licenses from those do we have since 2022?
Since 2022, I'm not sure. I could ask code enforcement for those numbers, but I don't have those.
Do you have a ballpark?
Code enforcement tracks them, but I don't.
Oh,
know
okay.
what that is.
Yeah.
I just wonder if we just have a whole bunch of people who think they can have apartments now that have completely bypassed the process and we have no idea what the numbers really are.
I have another question is, I think that's a great point, Commissioner Jensen. Another question I have is the So this path that'll remain left. What was I know we saw the person who came and did it.
Mhm.
What was the reason they chose to go that path versus the other one? Do you know? Do you remember the context there? If you don't
Yes.
remember, okay, yeah.
So they actually started talking to their neighbors pre-creating the pathways process. So back in 2022. And because even further back from that, before I was with the city, there was a process that neighborhoods or groups of people could get signatures and added to when we had an overlay zone, get added to the overlay zone. So they were trying to follow that process. That process went away. But then council was in discussions with them and said, well, we're coming up with this pathways process that kind of is like that, but it's a different process. So you can still get signatures and work through a certain way. So they said, okay, well, we'll keep gathering signatures then. And then,
I see.
They
So it's sort of a
eventually went-
carryover a little bit.
yes,
And if I recall correctly, this pathway got created in response to the state bill. It was sort of a compromise in response to a state bill but that triggered the changes originally. Is that correct?
yeah. So in 2021, HB 82 came out, and
Yep.
that's when we drafted 1430 and kind of reworked that. Pathways process was not originally part of that new ADUs thing that we passed. That came later in the end of 2022 when the Council Housing Commission said, well, there is to go with the general plan and with residents, and then also some members of the council, they wanted to expand ADUs, but we tried to seek a compromise between people that didn't want to expand ADUs and did. So we came up with this pathways process. So that way people could do it and get, one of the main concerns was that, well, what about our neighbors not wanting the increased density? So that's why the signature path was then included in those.
Got it. Okay, thank you. That's really helpful.
I'll just to help me kind of zooming out again, just to understand the whole process and make
Yep.
sure I'm on with this. So previously the process would, for this individual property owner pathway, would be that you could go get the signatures, and if you got the signatures, you could go to the city staff and get approved, and that was the process, right? Collect signatures, you go to city staff, and you can get approval just like that, right?
Yes.
And the new path is effectively you can still collect signatures. You go to planning commission, you go to city council. That's the process.
That's, yeah,
That-
one of the
or-
process.
yeah.
I mean, there's different ways you can do it, but yes,
For
as
this,
far as
okay.
just specifically the pathways, yes, you
Yeah.
can still always apply for a rezone, or you can just apply for an ordinance text amendment without signatures to get added to the map that allows ADUs.
Okay, thank you.
But as far as an administrative permit that we grant to a single property owner that runs with that property owner, that is going away with this proposed ordinance amendment.
Do we feel like, are there difficulties associated with having, because it feels like in a way that's kind of like a workaround, a kind of like it's not such a clean way as just having, does that make sense? Like, are there issues? Does it become complicated to have those kinds of things attached to properties and owners and floating around? Or is it just like, it's either way is fine from the city's perspective?
As far as the permit that runs with the property owner?
Yeah,
That's something that code enforcement and planning staff tracks. They track lots of licenses that have to be renewed annually and lots of permits, so that's something they already.
okay. So we don't
Are
see
good
this as like an inconvenience to the cities having to deal with this specifically. That's not the motivation for,
That's not the motivation for this, no.
okay.
And I can't speak to, maybe it is, but they're good at it already, tracking everything and keeping licenses and recorded, so,
Okay, thank you.
yeah.
Any other questions for staff member Daly? No? Okay. Thanks.
Mhm.
We'll go ahead and open this up for public comment. Are there any district chairs present? I don't see any. Is there any members from the public that want to comment on this? Not seeing anyone. We'll go ahead and close the public comment portion of this item. Discussion among commissioners.
I have some pros and cons that I worry that this is going to be a trickier process. Like we were talking about making it harder for them if you have to go through essentially what feels like a zoning code change. But I like that you can't just pick and choose your favorite neighbors to ask and then present those signatures for automatic administrative approval. It also takes the burden of responsibility off of the staff and puts it on larger bodies of appointed individuals. And I like that the fees are reduced or waived, so it's a lengthier process, but we're not charging them as though they're asking us to change the code for them. And so I feel like that sort of balances out the safeguard. The lengthier process gives it a safeguard that it's a more fair process. And then reducing the fees kind of compensates them for having to jump into that arena. So I don't have a problem with these changes.
Other commissioners? Commissioner South?
So I'm still a little befuddled about why they're repealing this special use application process. As I understood it from staff member Daly, the intent for expanding it was because it aligned with the general plan, it supported residents' interests, and supported some of the council leadership at the time. That's a pretty compelling reason to expand ADU options. On the heels of that, we just had the Provo City Housing Summit, and one of the objectives is to increase owner occupancy in the city of Provo. One of the arguments for ADUs is it allows mortgages to work because you have a secondary source of income. So people can in fact own their primary residence if they have a pathway to allow, to make those mortgage payments. So that all seems really positive. This is an area that I have done some research, so I know a little bit about the arguments against it, which to date have been met mostly by perceptions and not a lot of data. In fact, the data is the opposite, that we see ADUs generally do a better job of increasing home ownership and supporting communities in lots of other ways. But I'm just focusing on the home ownership side because that's a clear objective of our city as described by the council. So I'm a little surprised that we're now trying to walk back any opportunity that makes that accessible for the residents.
I don't feel
And
like, I don't feel like we're walking it back though. I feel like
We're making it more
Just-
difficult.
we are making it
We're
more
making it more
difficult.
difficult,
I
which
mean,
is the same.
The data speaks for itself. 30 people went through process A and one person went through this process. It's super hard to go the second process.
And that's the other point is even still trying to make it more accessible. We have only had 30 people in 2 years even attempt it. And that's just applying. We know some of them were denied and some of them didn't go through with it. So I don't see how this is hurting our community. If anything, we need to do more to make it accessible to people. If we're really serious about housing affordability and providing housing options for people in our community, ADUs will never be the solution, but it's one of many solutions that we need to do. And if we start cutting them out as soon as they're not performing, then I think we're setting ourselves up for making our ambitions of trying to increase home ownership and providing housing options for our residents. We're shooting ourselves in the foot. So
Would it be
I am-
acceptable to ask city staff what it's like when you review one of those that's being proposed to be no longer a pathway? Like when somebody comes in with their signatures, what does that review process look like from the staff perspective? Have either of you ever done one?
Yeah, and I'm curious I mean, there's one perspective here that's city council's perspective, and there's another perspective maybe that from development services. I'm curious if they're the same.
Well, let me just answer that real quick by noting that this isn't being brought to you by Development Services. It's being brought to you by council. But to answer your question, the process the administrative process isn't too difficult of one to pursue. We have a staff member that takes all of them. I am familiar with the process and what he does. But there's one staff member that handles these special use permits. They take them through this review, reviews the signatures. Then the next step is reviewing the actual site to see if it can meet the code standards. But yeah, I don't think that it's been troubling to staff in any way, if that's kind of the motivation for the question.
Do you feel like there's a loophole in there that people could take advantage of, asking only the neighbors that like them for their 66% and then to misrepresent themselves somehow, and then they come into you and you think it's fine and you move forward and that's causing problems? Like, I don't see why. I would say the reason it's a problem is because there's not enough oversight, but if you don't feel like that's been happening.
No, I think the council consider that when they require them a majority of the neighbors. There's always, not always, but there's often going to be a neighbor or two that there might be a history with, or they just have different views on it, right? So that's why it's not 100%, but 66% seem to be achievable for most of these people that wanted them.
Has there been any backlash? Have there been people who ended up getting it and their neighbors were all in an uproar about it?
I'm not aware of that scenario, but I know that we have had people come in and ask about this and then figure that they didn't think they could get 66% and then didn't pursue it.
So coming to the planning commission would give them an option, because they wouldn't have to have 66%. They could also have a hearing that might determine they should get it anyway, is what you're saying? Or what you're
But who
suggesting?
wants to go through those processes, right? We're just adding on more hurdles for people to jump over to get to that.
Yeah, I respectfully see it a little bit differently. Like, I see this rather than saying the current process, I ask 66% of my neighbors who like me and leave out 44% who don't.
34.
34, sorry, thank you. And coming to the planning commission as being a way to be more fair, or the city and the city council. Instead I see it as one really loud person with some relationships on the city council can knock out my ADU. It feels less fair to me, honestly. Like, just to make it personal, like, so where my parents live, it would be, we're on the east side, so it's a different, my grandpa's 87 years old. I was having a conversation with my grandpa with my dad just a couple weeks ago about what to do with grandpa. He lives alone in a condo in Arizona. We're really worried about him being by himself, and but he's fiercely independent and doesn't really want to like go into a nursing home. And so my dad was like, hey, we have a garage. Like, what if we turn it to ADU? And I said, funny enough, I'm not sure if we're going to be able to do that. And like, even me, this thought of like going in front of the city council, and I'm not going to name names, but there's one very person in the neighborhood that is very loudly against ADUs that I don't know who they could persuade on the 7-person committee. And even me, chairman of the planning commission, I'm like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to make that happen. And it just felt so demotivating to do this for grandpa. And like, the thing about ADUs is like, we have a shortage of housing in our community. We just do. And I think this is in the wrong direction. I think it's exactly the opposite direction we need to go. We need to make it so it's easier to build ADUs for some places where young families that are just starting can live, places where elderly people can age close to family members. I think those are really important moral issues for our community that are family centered.
I think you're right. I think there's enough requirements for ADUs and the rental dwelling license requirements that for those people that are trying to do it correctly, there's going to be safeguards in effect for the negative outcomes that we could foresee.
So some of the research talks about how permissive regulations are a necessary component, but they are woefully insufficient. There are already other issues with finance and with design standards that have to be met. I mean, not only do we need to fix the regulation side, in my opinion, we need to help create some other pathways to get through the other issues that people face in making this happen.
Yeah, I would, I've read, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I've been told that Provo is the only city in Utah County that doesn't already allow ADUs citywide by right. I believe that's what I've heard. I don't know if anybody else can.
I don't know if I've heard that or not, but I would imagine if there were any truth to it, that it's because of the difficulty that Provo has had in preserving their neighborhoods over the years with the demand for rental
Student housing.
housing.
Yeah.
So there's been a lot of headbutting trying to protect neighborhoods and meet those needs as well.
Yeah, I think like the approach that I think is sort of a balance of those needs is what we were talking about in item 3, which is a strong approach to owner occupancy, and then a more liberal approach to allowing them to help expand homeownership, which is what Commissioner South says the data says, and makes a lot of sense as I've talked to about some of people in my age cohort who have, who have a hard time considering how to make mortgage.
I'm just gonna be really brief. I'm tend to agree with, or most closely aligned with Commissioner South's comments.
Well, I'm totally fine denying this because if we don't have a problem with the current process, then I don't think any of us want to change it. Like, if anything, we would make it easier, it sounds like. So I like the safeguards that the current process has, and I like the duality of it, that if you're a man working alone, you can do it. And if you're a group of people, you can do it. And depends on how much effort you want to put into it, but there's still checks in place that will prevent the
Yeah.
worst case scenarios.
I would add on that. I think that, I think it's worth noting that the difference between signature gathering and then going to city staff versus signature gathering, then going to planning commission, then going to city council, that's a lot more hurdles,
Yeah.
And as you were bringing up, like, it's when you have a public hearing, that's not just about your immediate neighbors. And anybody in the city can come to a public hearing, and it's not just like, it's a new hurdle, right? Like you were saying, if somebody, in your zip code has an issue with your ADU, they can,
They could make it look like it's a big problem and they
Yeah.
don't actually have a
And-
hand in the game.
yeah.
I think we've seen that before on I've seen it before in some other neighborhood meetings where people felt that people from one side of the neighborhood were interfering in the processes of people on a certain street. But anyways.
Yeah, I'm hesitant to recommend approval for anything that seems like it's putting more roadblocks, especially as in our general plan. And as we were talking about the housing summit, there's so much discussion about this being something that we look at as an important part of our housing strategy. I agree with what's been said.
I feel like the first two things that we talked about helped to make it easier to use our housing stock to house more people. And these last two seems to have sort of made it trickier. And maybe that's why it's not sitting well with us, that it's going counter to what we're trying to accomplish so much with so many things we talk about.
Are we ready to hear a motion on this? I think I'm starting to feel some consensus.
I'll make a motion. I move that the planning commission recommend denial of the proposed amendment, item 4, requests for an ordinance text amendment to section 10.30.040 to remove previous legislation and replace it with new standards.
Okay, discussion on the motion?
Just to point out that it's section 14.30.040. I think you just misspoke.
Thank you.
Is there a second on the motion?
I'll second it.
Okay, let's go ahead and vote. Commissioner Shin?
Aye.
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 That's a recommendation of denial. 5-0.
And just as an after point, like, I don't know what we can do as a planning commission, but would love to be able to help, like, look at some of the options that we have to expand it. This, like I said, the data suggests ADUs are only one of many different tools. And we need to look at lots of tools, especially if the city council's plan to increase home ownership by a significant percentage is going to come to fruition. We need to step up our game. Like,
I was
Or
really
combined.
excited with a couple of the projects that we've had that have been very carefully guided with some of these principles of clustering and multiple densities in the same development.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's one of many tools.
Yeah, I'll just note, if we could, sounds like we want to talk about it in a work session.
Okay.
Item number 5. Gregory Hunt requests a zone map amendment from the RA residential agricultural and A 1.5 agricultural zones to the R16 one family residential zone, LDR low density residential zone and general commercial zone for 55 acres of land at approximately 1534 South, 1100 West, Sunset and Lakewood neighborhoods. Mr. Ardmore.
Then we're gonna do
Do you
these
wanna
two
read it
together.
number
And
six?
let me, read in item number 6. Gregory Hunt requests concept plan approval for a community with 122 single family lots, 144 low density units, and 2.5 acres of commercial land in proposed R16 one family residential, LDR, low density residential, and general commercial zones for 55 acres of land at approximately 1534 South, 1100 West Sunset, and Lakewood neighborhoods. Mr.
Okay,
Ardmore.
thank you. First, apology for the minor adjustments in numbers that was written as the application came in a year ago, and through the process, there's been some changes. So that hopefully clarifies that difference from the staff report. But here we are, we're looking at the top left map, just to kind of get you familiar with the area. 11th West is there on the right-hand side of the area in red, Lakeview Parkway on the south side there. So you can see through the zone map, it's right now it's A1 and RA, so agricultural zone, residential agricultural zone. General plan map identifies this as residential area with a bubble of mixed use, and more specifically, the Southwest neighborhood map for future land use identifies this again as residential, but more specific in that is the 12 acres of LDR allotted to this section of Southwest, and then commercial corner on that important node. And I think that you'll see how that's been adjusted through this plan and identified in your staff report. So kind of here's the overview. Like I said, there's 122 R1 lots. The R16 is being requested because some of those lots are down to the 6,000 square foot numbers, right? About 22 of them are between 6 and 7,000. But you'll see as you look a little more closely, there's a great range of lot sizes through here, up to over 12,000 square feet for some of them. That's not only something that staff has tried to encourage through this staff review, but it's supported by the general plan of mixing lot types, lot sizes to get different price points and products in the neighborhood. I think that was only added to with that 12 acres of LDR that's requested or recommended in the Southwest neighborhood plan. You could see how that's kind of shared through the neighborhood. We've got some attached townhomes here on the east side, and again through the center of it. And then you've got a kind of a detached townhome product, if you will, a smaller single-family detached unit here, and then again over on the west side. I think an important note, might be a question in some of your minds, is in that Southwest neighborhood map, the 12 acres of LDR was on the corner. Is kind of bubbling around that mixed use corner at 11th West, right? As we look at this and as we think about best planning practices, I think they've done a great job of mixing that LDR project throughout the development to not make an isolated island of a certain product type, but to share that with the community as a whole, and to share also the open space that is required with the LDR zone. So you can see 3 major open space nodes connected through trails and sidewalks, and then a small node over here to the trail that's been identified as a priority in the general plan, that Dry Creek Trail being an amenity for the city. So they've done a lot of good things here. I think a longer staff review going through this with the applicants has helped produce a product that is really supported and supports objectives of the general plan. And here's kind of just what I went over with those acreages of the different zones that are being requested. And just to finish up, these are very conceptual, just some examples at this point of products that could fit through this development. This will continue to be refined as they go through the process, and then after the zone change, if it's approved, to really nail down what the products are going to look like. But you could see rear loaded single family detached in the top left corner. They've got front and rear loaded townhomes through the project. And then you kind of your standard R1 front loaded single family. I think that's my last slide. Let me make sure I've covered everything I want to cover. So in whole, 266 new dwelling units in the city, which is going to help not only this little community, but I think as we get more and more housing stock in the city, it's going to help the rental rates. It's going to help the home prices. When we increase the supply, it's going to help those affordability issues. But that is all I have, unless you have some questions for me. I can try to answer this.
Go ahead, Commissioner Jensen.
Did we, it seems like we reviewed a project on this very corner, maybe 2 or 3 years ago. Because I remember talking about the Dry Creek Trail and what they were gonna do. So can you remind me the history of what happened with that? Because I want to say it was approved.
It wasn't.
Okay.
They were looking at a similar mix of products, but not complying with the densities that we
Okay, it
were
was too
limited to.
dense. Okay. Then my other two questions are, is the development agreement that's being discussed already, it looks like, because it's in the staff report, is that to ensure that the variety shown is what's actually built? So we don't say, yeah, we like this, and then instead of getting a variety, we get a whole bunch of 5,000 square foot lots or 6,000 square foot lots.
That's one of the main points of it is making sure we get this type of variety of layout.
Okay.
Getting the variety of product types. The road connection, the road network was really important aspect of this, making it a grid style pattern without cul-de-sacs was a big deal. And then the last thing you'll know in the staff report is the sewer infrastructure still needs to be worked out. So they wanted to be clear that
Okay.
even if the zone change is approved, that we still need to get that sewer in there.
And that's something that the developer will have to help make happen.
Correct.
Okay. A couple more questions. It says that there were concerns at the neighborhood meeting about owner occupancy, commercial users in the street network. Does this plan that we see now, since that was almost a year ago, are they addressed, those concerns addressed?
Yeah, so I think anytime you see any mix of products, there's always going to be a concern of high rental rates. This group has made clear that they're concentrated on for sale housing. They're not hoping to keep any of these as rentals, right? So it's a for sale community. The commercial users have yet to be identified, but that was more of, I shouldn't have put it as a concern, more of just a curiosity at the
Okay.
neighborhood district meeting.
So is the for sale-ness of it, is that something in the development agreement that's being discussed as well?
It's probably going to be discussed at the council level. It's
Okay.
not in the draft that has been going back and forth, but I'm sure it'll be
Because that's
discussed.
talk and action are two different things there, so that would worry me.
Right.
The commercial, is that accessed off of the corner of 1100 West and Lakeview Parkway, or is that intended to be accessed off that interior road?
So it's been identified that there'd be a full intersection, left and right turns on 11th West, nothing on Lakeview Parkway.
Okay,
I'm not sure about the interior access off the local streets.
okay,
It probably depends on the user they get.
right. And then my last one is kind of an engineering question. How do we ensure that the fill that is going to be required to bring it out of the flood zone is going to be compacted appropriately? Because I happen to live behind a development that wasn't compacted appropriately, and all the foundations are cracked and leaky basements, and now these ones won't have basements, but still, is there anything? I know that because I know that the inspections and the requirements were met in the development of that subdivision as well, but how do we learn from those mistakes and not make them on this development were it to be approved?
I'll let David Day speak to that.
That's what I thought.
David Day with Public Works. So they would have to submit documentation that it's been compacted to the proper amount of compaction. So with rollers and stuff like that. So that would be built into the grading plan and the permit that's issued, and then the inspections that happen to make sure it was compacted properly.
So what happens if there's a cracked foundation 5-10 years later? Does someone have legal standing to say, hey, this person said this was compacted properly and my foundation just cracked, so now
Yes, so
how does that work?
normally the warranty on a new home is a year. So after a year,
It's normal settling?
it is,
Hmm.
yeah.
Okay. That's
But-
unfortunate.
One of the advantages this site has is of being raised up kind of homogeneously is that all of that material will be somewhat similar in nature, and so it'll create kind of a bridge to the underlying soils. So in a earthquake liquefaction foundation, you have to bring in about 2 to 3 feet of fill anyway. And so this will kind of take care
Have
of
a
that
double purpose.
here. So
Okay,
it'll be a good thing for this site to be raised.
cool. Thank you.
I have a couple questions. First off, is the applicant here to answer questions, or are you just
Yeah,
Okay.
they are here.
okay? Do they have like a presentation they're going to give for any of this, or is this it?
No, I think they're just here to answer questions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, a couple questions I had. So I think this is a really interesting looking project. I would it seems like it would meet a lot of a need that is not always easily met in other places in the city right now. Okay, a couple questions. One, what's like, so looking at these different sizes of lots, just to get a sense of like what kind of size of square footage are we expecting of homes are going to be built on these, like what's the range for the square footage of the homes that could go on these lots?
Yeah, I'll let the applicant address that one.
Okay.
Yeah.
I guess I think the other questions I had would probably be more applicable to them. So yeah.
Any other questions for Mr. Ardmore?
Here.
Thanks. Yeah, we'll go ahead and bring up the applicant. Gregory Hunt listed. You'll have 15 minutes for your presentation. When your time is up, you'll hear a ding and the microphone will be muted. Following your presentation, if we have questions, we will invite you to come forward at that time. Go ahead and state your name.
Gregory Hunt. We pretty much am just available for questions. I do want to thank your staff and everybody who's been involved. We spent a lot of time working on this, a lot of different revisions, ran through. I've gotten to know your engineering department well. We've run lots of different options on sewers and we're still getting closer. And as far as planning, they've been great. We've worked this through. We've had multiple revisions and worked through and made sure we met all the code and made sure it worked with your general plan.
Is anything else you want to add to that?
No?
Okay, well, it's all right. Well, I think Commissioner Sinnott has some questions for you.
Yeah, I had a couple questions. So one, I think it was mentioned this is like it has been like a year in the works. It's been a while, right?
It's been longer than that.
Okay.
That's when we finally filed and then
Okay.
we spent the last several months on truthfully working on the sewer issues.
Okay. So I guess one of my questions is with this plan here, with us, kind of looking at this for the first time, if we have feedback, if we have thoughts or things that we are like, oh, we'd like to see this or like that, like how set in stone is this? Because if you've been working on this for a long time and it's like, this cannot, we're like asking you to go back to the drawing board. If we ask for like a small change, like what's kind of the status of that?
There's still some flexibility, but we tried to take those rear loaded homes on the far west. That was to meet requirement for the city that they wanted the front of the house to face that trail so that you didn't just have a fence along there and it just kind of a no man's land. They wanted to be more open and that was the best option we could come up with without building two roads.
Mhm.
Otherwise we'd have had to run a road down there and then one further in. And that's pretty tough to do because then we got to have a trail and a road. So we've tried to work with them and they've given us suggestions and we've come back and forth with different options and moved some streets around. We do have a little spring in the center we have to work around. You can see that blue area. And so.
But just those homes on the west that he's referring to, with the last applicant, the developer just refused to do that. The alternative is exactly what he described. The alternative is you end up with a 6-foot fence along a public trail.
Yeah.
Which creates blind spots, which is not smart planning. So the front of the house facing that way, which can't have more than a 3-foot fence. Garages in the rear. This just works a whole lot better for a public trail that's going to be right there. So we're very appreciative to this developer who's taken suggestions like that and has incorporated them into the plan.
Yeah, that's great. One question I had the square footage of housing, like what's the range of that?
It's going to be really most of them, I believe, will end up being 2-story. So I think the minimum is gonna be probably 1,500 to as high as probably 3,500.
Okay. And then, yeah, I'm curious about the commercial parcel. Do you have plans for what that could be?
We actually purchased the property on the other side of the street so we could match them up. And we've had discussions with convenience stores, hotels. We do have some users somewhat lined up, you know, no hard commitment yet for some food, different restaurants. We become pretty well versed in your sports park and your airport. We've met with quite a few of them.
Yeah.
And we have people that are very interested. They understand that the number of people that are gonna be going up and down that road over the next couple, in the future is going to go up dramatically. But until we're ready, it's kind of hard and to get them somebody to say, yeah, we'll do it. But we have met with every major convenience store company in the state.
Any other questions for the applicant?
I have quite
Go ahead. Jensen.
What are your plans for the open space areas? I love that there's a lot of them. Do you have a vision of what you want those to look like?
Playgrounds, picnic area, those type of things.
Just generically user
Yeah,
spaces?
Trying to make sure that it's usable,
Okay.
family friendly.
What about that Blue River? Is that actually the river that goes
It's not
underneath
a-
the road there?
It's really an odd thing. You walk in there and all of a sudden there's just a hole in the ground. And a little bit of water. There's a pipe that goes underneath Lakeview. We're just gonna try to
Turn it into something nice
we're gonna-
looking?
and leave it as intact as possible.
Okay. Where do the trails connect? I remember when we talked about this several years ago, because that dike trail doesn't exist yet. Are we calling it a dike trail? What's it actually called?
Dry Creek. That's.
Dry Creek, thank you. Because the Dry Creek trail doesn't exist, it's just a vision. Like, what does that look like? Do you have to build the trail as part of your
We have to
development?
build one along Lakeview that'll match pretty much what that Osprey townhomes to the east of us
So
looks
there'll be a
like.
sidewalk on the north side of Lakeview Parkway that you're building.
Yes.
Okay,
And it'll also, they've given us a standard and we've matched it. And it will run up along there and it will end where our property ends. But eventually it appears that it go all the way up to the street to the north, close to the ballparks.
okay. So the Dry Creek trail will just tie into that sidewalk?
There on that corner, yes.
Okay. And what about fencing? Are there standards that it can't be a tall fence because like these people's front yards that are going to be facing on that proposed, the way it's
You
proposed will
did
be
have
like,
fencing, we had fencing guidance.
so they
and
have to be low fences so that it's not invisible, or they
wasn't
can
it
be
slotted
tall and
corner?
see-through, or?
Wasn't it a slotted fence?
So it can be taller as long as it's 50% open. So
Oh,
there's a
okay.
variety
So it
of
could be a
ways to do that.
6-foot
Yep.
fence, just every other slat or something. Okay. And then the other one was, how do you anticipate buffering or separating between the commercial uses and the neighborhood?
At this point, we were just planning on fencing it.
Okay,
We didn't intend, we discussed several times with Mr. Day, possibly having a right in, right out onto Lakeview. We looked at different areas within the project of doing that. Our traffic report came back that it should be able to handle it for many years. And then as the development goes further west, that large road that goes to the west will be able to pick up all that traffic. And then just to the west of this, there's another north-south road that will connect to Lakeview.
what about the neighborhood? Do you have plans like to have a pedestrian access there, or are you just gonna have a fence all the way around? I'm just looking at like lot 105. Are they stuck with a 7-Eleven behind them, or even something nicer, but whatever, without being, they have to go all the way around to get to it? Or is it possible that it will be open if it's something that's conducive, or is that still up in the air?
Still up in the air. I mean, there's some negative to that is, do you want
There's probably.
the people who live in this neighborhood, do they want people pulling into a gas station and walking into their neighborhood? I mean, we
Okay.
haven't made a firm decision there.
You're probably right to fence it off. It's not that far to go around.
I mean, that's our initial thought. I mean, if you could, there'll probably be potentially an access going south onto that trail and they could go there.
And you said that you're putting in the sidewalk infrastructure on 1100 West as well? Or is that
we'll
already
have-
there?
We'll have to finish that.
Okay.
And where we own both sides of it.
That's nice. That's exciting. Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Hunt? No. Thank
And
you.
Thank you very much.
That's the applicant. We'll move on to public comment portion. We'll allow if there's a district chair present, like them to speak. Anyone from the district? I'm not seeing anyone. With that, we'll open it to public comment. When your time is up, you'll hear a ding and the microphone will be muted. Each person may make one comment. If we have questions, we'll invite you to come back in the microphone at the time. Again, this is comments only. If you have questions about an item, please speak with Mr. Ardmore privately. Anyone from the public? 2 minutes? No.
No.
All y'all here for the creamery?
I would have never guessed that.
Okay. I thought there's some public here for this.
Okay.
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and close the public comment portion on items. We're hearing these together, so I'm closing it for items for items number 5 and 6. Does that change anyone else's on them coming up? Okay. Commissioners, our chance to, we'll close the public comment on those items. Commissioners, time for us to discuss. I'm gonna take it first bite of the apple. I really like this, Mr. Hunt. Might be one of the most. I come from an undergraduate background in urban and regional planning, and it hasn't been very often where we've seen projects like this, where it has such diverse options in lot size, home size, all within the neighborhood, and there's a commercial element to it too. This might be one of the most well-balanced concept plans I've seen come across in my time on planning commission. So kudos to you for that. I love the open space areas that are interspersed on different segments of the parcels. I love that. And then just another comment. I don't know what you've proffered to the city council in terms of a development agreement, but I guess this comment would be more directed towards city council as if they're listening and thinking about this. One of the things I went to the housing summit has come up, and actually all 5 of us were there at the Provo Housing Summit. And one of the things I spoke with someone from Utah League of Cities and Towns, and we talked about tools to increase ownership. And in past projects, developers have proffered a minimum 1 year owner occupied component as part of the development agreement. And talking to some other people, the person I spoke to recommended 5 years. I don't know if city council is inclined to go for 5 years, but in order to encourage homeownership, if that was proffered, that would be something I would encourage city council to seek after. But that's all I have.
Yeah, I'd say that I would second that. I feel very positive on what I've seen from this. I can say that now. I know that nobody's going to yell at me for saying that. But no, I'm really interested in this. I think that it is something that's very sorely needed right now. That's the fact that we the mixed types of lots, mixed types of housing, and mixed use is something that we don't see that almost anywhere in the city built for new projects. The zoning that we have in the city makes it so difficult to allow that, and I think it's really interesting and encouraging to see this project. A couple things I think are really big positives I'm happy about. One, the mix of house sizes and house types. One of the top issues that people have, we talk about the issues with renting, with transiency. So many of, I think, the neighborhoods we have in the city, are just the zoning enforces one single type of housing, And so it makes it very difficult for anybody who wants to move through stages of life. If you're a young person who just wants to rent, buy a townhouse or rent an ADU or whatever like that, you graduate to having a couple kids and you got to have a big house, and suddenly you have to, leave your entire neighborhood and uproot and go across town. Then you get a big family, you got to uproot again and move to a whole nother neighborhood. And then when you're old and you want to downsize, it's like, once again, you got to move again because you can't, the neighborhoods are not always planned out in a way where you have that mix that lets you stay rooted in a place. And I think this is really a great thing to have the mix. So you can imagine, families and people who want to, stay connected to a place, being able to move throughout that neighborhood through different, stages of life. I think that it was mentioned the commercial use, I think that's great. I think that when I first saw this, my initial thought is how great would it be to have a small neighborhood scale grocery store there, I mean, I know it's a West Side thing that there's been desire for, for grocery and that kind of thing. To me, it would make so much sense to say, you could have like the creamery that we're about to talk about, a great place that everybody loves. Students love the creamery. Everybody goes there. I think it would make so much sense to have something like that in this neighborhood, and not to wall it off, but actually make something that is part of the neighborhood where you could just get there, you could walk there. You don't have to go around a fence and be like you're in the backyard or, the back parking. I think it would be awesome if you could actually have that as part of the street and say, this is part of the neighborhood. And then put parking on towards the major roads, but I'd be very interested to see this, make it through. And so I'm glad we have it brought before us.
I'm already branding the creamery. It's going to be the Culp, the
The Culp.
creamery on Lakeview Parkway.
Oh, there you
It
go.
doesn't have quite the same ring, but it's good. Culp. All right. I have some pros and cons I've been writing down. For the most part, I totally love this. It's exactly what we've been talking about for the last 2 hours. It's what we've been envisioning and hoping for. But just to show that we've thought about it properly, one of the requirements for a zone change from agriculture is that it hasn't been used for an agricultural use for previously, or, in the last little while, and this one hasn't. So I liked that. I love the variety of the lot sizes and the potential price differences in the different types of housing stock you could get from that. I like that the open space hasn't been pushed out to the corners. A lot of times we see all the houses together and then we just get this random gross dog park on the corner. And I feel like this is going to be usable space in, kind of like a yard for people who don't have a yard. The cons, I don't like that there's not many transit options to serve the area. If we're talking about putting this many houses in and we don't have a way to get them out. I know that's something that comes with development, so it's not something we should expect to exist before they build, but that's just something to keep in mind. I feel like the rear loaded townhomes, it's a balancing thing for me. It's not good for the neighborhood to be facing those garages, but it is a safety feature for the trail. And the more I thought about it, I thought how cool it would be for a pilot who works at the airport to sit there. And if it's like I used to go to the airport and watch airplanes take off and land with my dad. And I thought how cool that would be to just sit there on your front porch and look out over the sunset as the airplanes take off. Like it got a little magical for me. So suddenly I wasn't so sad about the rear loaded homes there, but those are some pros and cons, mostly pros.
Thank you, Commissioner Jensen. Anyone else? Commissioner Sal? Commissioner Whitlock? No? Does anyone want to put forward a motion?
Well, I guess the first question is, do we have a problem with changing from residential agriculture and agriculture to R16 and low density residential and general commercial?
I don't, I feel that it's consistent with the general plan and the Southwest Neighborhood Plan.
I agree too. There's like nothing that conflicts with it, except for maybe somebody's opinion about keeping it the same way.
Yeah. Just by way of relationally, like if there's opportunities for developments like this in other parts of the city to have this mixture of densities, I'd hope that the city would encourage that as well.
Yeah, I think I think it'd be great to see this closer to the middle of town, and not just have to be like on the edge, that we get these kinds of cool developments that are actually really beneficial. I think to the comment about transit, I mean this is Lakeview Parkway, right? Like if there's any, it seems like it would make a lot of sense that in the future there could be, to the airport, bus lines, things like that. It's a natural place that this could have transit alongside it,
That transit's already
Um,
being formulated.
Oh yeah, okay.
And this won't be on the edge of town for very much longer.
Yeah.
It is the edge of town, though.
Now it is.
Yeah.
10 more years, it's not going to be.
Oh, wait a second. That agricultural land across the way is protected wetland.
To the
So
south.
technically, this has to be the edge of town,
Oh.
Mr. Pepperoni.
Correct.
There may be something to the east, but it will always be wetland to the south.
I'd say just one last thought with going along with that. It might be useful then to think about how this relates to potential, if Lakeview Parkway could get a bus stop on it, it would be nice to have a cut through where you could walk through and not have to go like if there's a bus stop in the middle of Lakeview Parkway on the other side of this, that could be kind of hard to get to if you're trying to bike and walk. If you could have, and maybe not even like a drive through, but just like a walking, biking path you could connect through and get to the bus stop, or just we're thinking ahead to like what could be a bus stop there or something, that's just a thought that might be useful to think about.
And Mr. Hunt did suggest that there might be a trail that goes out to Lakeview Parkway from the interior of the subdivision. So that would be nice for that reason too.
Mhm.
All right, I don't have a problem with the zone change and I don't have a problem with the development.
Yeah, concept plan, I don't see anywhere where I'd make further corrections to it.
I'll reiterate, I would love to see the commercial space integrated into the neighborhood instead of being thought of as like, a fenced off parking lot. That's your view. I think it'd be incredible if we could actually have like street level, close to the street in the neighborhood, keep the parking away from the neighborhood, have the commercial face the street,
I initially thought that, but then I realized that a lot of the use of the commercial space isn't going to come from the neighborhood, depending on what it is. And if it's people headed out to the sports park, as a neighbor, I would actually want it to be fenced off and I'd be happy to walk around
Yeah.
4 houses.
I think it'd be like a mixed bag, like you'll
Yeah.
have half the community might want access from the rear and then others.
Yeah,
Well-
I just feel like it's not that far removed to walk around the equivalent of 4 houses to get to it. So I'm starting to lean more the other direction. But I agree with you. If it's compatible with the neighborhood use, it would be a shame to cut it off.
If it was a gas station, maybe not. If it's like a grocery store,
But if it's a creamery on Lakeview Parkway,
Culp.
then maybe you'd want to open it up.
Can I make a motion?
Yeah, please.
All right. Should I do them separately? Should we do them separately and vote separately? Okay.
Yeah,
I'll make a motion on item number 5 that the planning commission recommend approval of item number 5. Gregory Hunt requests a zone map amendment from sorry, am I on the wrong item?
No, that's right.
Okay, sorry. Okay, let me start over. I recommend that planning commission forward approval for item number 5. Gregory Hunt requests a zone map amendment from the residential, agricultural, and A15 zones to the R16, one family residential zone, LDR zone, and CG zone for 55 acres of land at approximately 1534 South, 1100 West, Sunset and Lakewood neighborhoods, subject to approval of a development agreement.
is there discussion on the motion? Is there a second on the motion?
I'll second it.
Okay, let's go ahead and vote.
Aye.
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 Item number 5 is
I'm gonna keep
recommended
rolling.
for approval. 5-0. Item number 6. Go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you
I
off.
just like to point out that item 6 has an asterisk, but I think it's administrative, not legislative. So we're
Yeah,
actually not making a recommendation. We're approving or
Yeah.
denying, correct?
Yeah.
yes.
Okay, amazing. I make a motion that planning commission approve the concept plan for item number 6. Gregory Hunt requests concept plan approval for a community with 122 single family lots, 144 low density units, and 2.5 acres of commercial land in proposed R16, LDR, and CG zones for 55 acres of land at approximately 1534 South, 1100 West, Sunset, and Lakewood neighborhoods.
Do we need to make this pending the zone change, or is that implied? And what about the development agreement? Do we need to make it conditional on that? Okay.
Is there a second on the motion? or
I'll second it.
discussion?
Oh, do you
Yeah.
want to have
No
discussion?
discussion? And I have a second from Commissioner Jensen. Let's go ahead and vote.
I.
Aye.
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 Uh, Planning Commission approves the concept plan for 5-0. We're gonna take a short 5-minute break. One of our Commissioner Whitlock will, we're gonna excuse him. We'll still have a quorum, so we will be able to vote on item number 7, but we'll take a 5-minute break. Thank you.
Those people were here for the other item.
What other item?
They're here for the.
I know. Let's do that.
I'm just gonna note our 5 minutes is up. Yeah. Don't want to keep item number 7 waiting longer than they have. And thank them for their patience as we work through this lengthy agenda.
We all know what our favorite flavor of creamery ice cream is. If you want to know, we could just tell you later on.
Yeah.
Do tell.
Rocky Road.
In Shanley chocolate. It was a good one. The newest one.
And then Graham Canyon.
But we don't like chocolate Graham Canyon. We like regular Graham Canyon at my house. Thumbs down on the chocolate.
Okay. Well,
It's just curiosity. They regret it every time. Okay, on to business.
yeah. I'm calling this meeting back to order. I'm gonna read in item number 7. BYU requests project plan approval for the demolition and rebuild of the Cone Creamery building located at 1209 North, 900 East in the CG zone, University neighborhood. Staff member Nancy Robinson presenting.
Okay. So, let's see. Is our clicker working moving forward? Okay. So here we have the area that we are talking about right there on the corner of 900 East and Heritage Drive. That area is approximately 2.5 acres. The current building that they have is approximately 8,040 square feet. And the new building that they are looking to build is approximately 15,000 square feet. We've got this drawing that shows where they are proposing to put the new creamery and then the demolition. After that's built, then the demolition of the current one. The existing parking lot right now provides 42 spaces. And then the proposed parking lot for the site will be 140 spaces. There are some nice renderings that were on the on BYU's site to, show what it is. Here, those heritage halls behind it. And then this is, these were 2 pages of their landscape design, and I put them together, but they're obviously not to scale because the parking lot is a little bit smaller on the one side, but that was my attempt at getting it to be on 1 page. So if you use your imagination a little bit, it goes to the top. So yeah, staff has reviewed the project plan proposal and found it to meet all relevant requirements and believes that this would enhance the experience for BYU students and the surrounding neighborhood, and recommend approval of the project.
Can you help me, if we look at page number 5 or attachment under 3, the elevations? There's a part of me that feels like it doesn't, is this adding up or consistent with what is reflective in real life? Like, because that on the first picture, on the first rendering, shows the creamery right there and a sidewalk and then pavement. Is that, but I thought is this not fronting 9th East then?
The parking lot is, let me just go forward.
I'm
a
sorry,
little bit.
yeah.
You're fine.
The
So,
parking lot is fronting 9th East.
yes, so now, I mean, because in that bottom, let's see if I can do it. So right around here is where the current building is.
Yeah,
So they will build the new building over here and then demolish the other one and finish the parking.
So in that rendering, you're looking at sidewalk and drive aisle, not sidewalk and 9th East. In the
gotcha.
rendering you were referring to. Is that
Okay.
correct?
Yeah, okay.
And the building itself isn't even shown because this is the landscape plan. The building is
Right.
to the north of what's here on this landscape plan, correct?
It,
West of the parking, north of the landscaping.
so this is the building, correct?
Come on.
It's further north.
Can,
No.
I actually,
Yeah.
can you come up and just
Sure.
with the pointer?
That's the highlighter, yeah.
This, what you're highlighting is the exterior walls of the building.
This, the south walls.
Okay, and then below that is that plaza, like raised covered
Yeah,
patio?
there's two different
Two
levels.
tiers of patio.
Yes,
Okay, okay. That's helpful. Thank you.
okay,
Maybe,
right,
Oh.
that's what I told him. It was my attempt at.
I might not be
putting the two-
understanding, but sorry, looking at this slide, is the entire creamery building, so this, the part with the corner cut off, like that's a plaza, right?
Sorry, which part at the top?
I wish I could point at it. The part that has like the diagonal corner cut off,
This here,
below that.
all this right here,
Okay, so is the entire building in this picture? Or
No,
is, oh, okay,
it is
that's
not,
why I'm confused on.
because it's only the landscape.
Oh, okay.
That's
very
like the
confusing.
requirement of the,
So do we not have an entire picture of the plot with like a top down? I see this here, but we don't have like a diagram of exactly where the building is actually going to sit on the full diagram
I do
zoomed
not
out.
at this,
Okay.
thing. Back to the site plan.
I'm just trying to understand.
Whoops,
Yeah.
This one.
Let's stay on this one. Yeah. You could just narrate which,
top button highlights.
yeah.
There you go.
Okay, he's using the green
Okay.
pointer to outline the footprint of the building. He's going over it a second time. Okay,
It's like an inverted state
Okay.
of Utah shape.
okay.
Plazas, the outdoor space
Mm.
here and here.
Okay.
Nice.
So on this parcel, we're really shifting it east
West.
or west, sorry,
and-
sorry,
Yeah, west
West.
and north.
and north. Okay. Does that help? That helps me a ton. Thank you. Okay, any other questions for?
I have one question.
Go ahead.
Sorry. So I'm seeing in this, our document here, it says the existing parking lot currently provides 42 spaces. The proposed parking lot would provide 140 spaces. So that's like about 3 times, right?
Right.
What's the impetus behind increasing the parking lot by such a large factor?
Have you ever tried to park at the creamery on night?
No, I used to walk there because I lived there.
That's the impetus.
And they're almost doubling the size of the building. And we have 2 standards for parking. There's a square footage requirement for the dining area because they will have a restaurant part to it. And then there is a parking requirement for grocery, that type of store. And so according to both of those combinations of square footage, the requirement is only 112 parking spaces that would be needed, and they're providing 140.
I'm curious how much attention development services is paid on to the kind of the walkability and accessibility of this, because we normally kind of discourage parking lots. I thought there's kind of generally been some discouragement of parking lots fronting streets and being on the sidewalk, and I say that because yeah, like when storefronts meet the road, that there's creates a more walkable community. And then the second part of that being just anecdotally, just family members. I have a family member that lives in the Tree Streets area across the street, and all the other kids the Creamery is a place where tons of kids, that's their summer walk. They walk through the neighborhood, and the parents let them. They're 6 and 7 years old. They let them cross the street, and because they know the light's right there. It's a controlled intersection, and the entrance is right there. And so with kids having to traverse an additional parking lot like that, do you feel they've adequately addressed walkability and
So,
safety with that?
I know that there's conversations with engineering, Vern Kessler, and specifically turn lanes. I haven't necessarily been part of those conversations. David might be able to say something else. And also because of the fact that one building is being used, and so you have to, accommodate the fact that building's being used and build another one in its place, and then demolish that. You can't necessarily just demolish the one and spend the time to completely build the other one, I think is partially, but certainly the developer could speak to that.
Commissioner Gonzalez,
Yeah.
this is in the public facility zone, and in this zone, we don't have that requirement or that prohibition about parking between the street and the building, like we do in some of the other zones you're used to seeing. Also, 9th East is in the design corridor where we have specific design standards for that. I'm sure Mr. Bernier can explain why the reasoning behind what they are proposing. Everything he does is very thoughtful. But we have already had neighborhood calls about, oh my gosh, is there going to be enough parking for the new creamery? So that concern's already out there, but I'll let him address the rationale for why they're doing things the way they are.
Yeah, and like I bring those up not necessarily out of concern for the parking. I like that there's going to be more parking there, but just the walkability factor and safety in regards to that. Given like the speeds of 9th East, it's a 35-mile-an-hour corridor, but there people go 40. You have the death by the Taco Bell down, half a mile down the road or so. Just thinking about that. But thank you. I'll save my questions for the applicant. Does anyone else have questions for Staff Member Robinson? No?
Great.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, we'll now have the applicant come forward. You'll have 15 minutes for your presentation. When your time is up, you'll hear a ding and the microphone will be muted. Following your presentation, if we have questions, we invite you to come forward at that time. Can you please state your name and maybe title and affiliation with Brigham Young University?
Sure. My name is full name Raymond Robert Bernier, but I go by Ray Bernier. I am the Managing Director of Planning and Construction for major projects at Brigham Young University. I'm also considered the campus architect. Been with them now 16 years, and I enjoy working at the campus. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have related to the site. The first question of walkability, I don't know if I can use this properly.
Please.
I'll try to see if I can move forward or backward. I'd like to see if I can do that. Do I just press the bottom or the top? Okay. You can see the outside areas there, for example, and you notice how there's a walkway between the parking lot where those people are standing near the front of the building, so to speak. We brought that all the way out to the Heritage Drive on purpose with the intent of walkability as well. And I'll show you that in the site plan. You can see children in there, and we understand how important this will be to children as well.
Are there two entrances?
There are two means of coming into the building. For example, the main entrance, I'm bringing the green thing over. That's the main entrance of the building that comes into the grocery store that's more on the north portion of the building. And on the southern portion, about maybe 20% of the building is going to be the place where they have ice cream and a grill, an area to sit inside. So on wet days, you can be right at these windows, seeing Y on the mountain and seeing the beautiful city as well. But there's also outdoor seating, which we're also going to put, and we've already designed it to be able to have heating so that it can extend into the cooler months either direction, but also misting so that in the summertime it gets used more as well. I ought to go back to your question related to the other door. So here's the other door that comes in. We put a ramp in here because of the change of grades. So this meets ADA in terms of getting wheelchairs up to this as well. And there's also, you can see walkway over here, steps coming up for those that don't need that, some more steps in here. People can come over to here. There's also a window. And unfortunately, this is kind of in the way, but there's the window right there. You come up from the outside and order directly to people standing at that window and be able to then receive food directly from there as well without going into the building if you chose to. You can also go inside, and there's a whole area made for patrons that are there wanting to either have ice cream or the grill and be able to then stand in line and be able to, much better than the existing building, to be able to get to the areas, to be able to order what you'd like. You can receive it there and go outside, or you can receive it there and sit inside by these windows right here as well. Should I go to the site plan and let you see more of the flow of people as well?
I would appreciate that if you can indulge me.
There again, you can see where that window is and some things from this angle as well, some of the seating. We've also, one other comment I want to make with regards to protection of children. You see this area right in through here. We've also put fencing all the way around it with the idea of people not falling off of that area. Because we know how energetic children can be. I've got 5 boys. They're older now, but they used to be very energetic. So even though there's 2 different scales here, and you can see the scale based upon the sidewalk, for example, the size of this sidewalk compared to the size of that sidewalk. Here's the intersection. All right. Now, one thing I should make sure has been clearly communicated. Okay. We've agreed with Vern from the city and other people that we're going to do a right in and a right out and change that. That's not the cone that's paying for that. That's actually Brigham Young University to be paying for this adjustment right here. We've also agreed to, although this plan doesn't show it, we've agreed to a right turning lane for people to get off 900 East and be able to pull out like they do right by the music building. In other words, just to the south of this. So there's also going to be a turnout lane there. And we've agreed to that to be part of this process through the CRC process, just so you're aware of that. But the idea of having people coming into here, our encouragement isn't for them to do this type of thing. The idea would be that they have a sidewalk and they come all the way up to where this sidewalk is and either come this direction. I'm sorry, I did that too soon. The exterior main entrance I showed you is up here to the north. So we just have part of that building. Here's the outside door to the seating area. They can also come this way, of course, and come upstairs and come to that location. There's also stairs over here for students coming in as well that may have been on campus. Here's the ramping that I was talking about, getting them into this area so they can come in if they have wheelchair access as well. So they would come up this direction, come this way, and be able to come in, get to the windows that are here or go in through the doors. Have I answered your question? Commissioner Gonzalez, I think I should say.
Right.
Okay.
I think so. Yeah.
Okay. Other questions you may have? Yes, please.
Commissioner Jensen.
Mr. Jensen.
I only have one question. I have some comments we can discuss later, but
Sure.
my question for you is something that we discussed when they built the music building, which is since this right now is already fenced off and some of the parking is blocked off, which I assume is shared parking between Heritage and the Creamery anyway, but is there adequate parking for the Creamery while the new one is under construction, or is everyone running across the street willy-nilly because that's where the parking is?
Understand your question, and we made it so that there's this isn't the most recent diagram with regards to your question, okay? But the idea that there is parking still, and most people don't like the parking, but right here on the southern portion. So that has not changed. There is parking up here, and the parking in that area essentially was mostly for the creamery, okay? So we've now made it so people can come in this way, and they can then, we've made it so there's a turn aisle here. They can come in through here, get around this way, and be able to then egress. And so this parking area has all been allocated specifically up through this area and down through here, has been allocated to the creamery. We've closed off these two heritage housing buildings, okay, from this site at the time, at now, waiting for that to happen. We are still allowing, of course, traffic to come down through here and be able to get onto 900 East, but we're not encouraging them to park in this area at all. Does that make sense?
So the only parking that got sacrificed was the housing parking.
See all the housing up here, all of that parking is gone. We got a new building, as I mentioned, going in this area here. So a lot of this was the housing parking. All of that has been vacated, as they're now doing with a grading or a grading permit. They're now already doing some underground work in through this area.
So with regards to this, I'm seeing the site phase 1, site phase 2A, 2B. Could you clarify kind of the timeline of like what happens first with this project? What gets knocked down? What gets built up? Like order of operations on this?
Great question, because when I was first talking to folks representing the project, I talked about the idea of, do we have to pull a demolition permit now? Because reality is, as Nancy just explained, this needs to stay. We want this to stay operational. There's a lot of students in heritage housing and elsewhere that come here because they want to get food close to campus and food to go and those kinds of issues, right? All of us also love the ice cream, many different flavors that we love. I like the spicy fries. If you ever get a chance, go buy some spicy fries there. But with all of it, I'm just kidding. But with all of this, you look at it and say, phase 2, then with agreement with the city, we're going to pull the permit for the demolition of that after we've gotten so close to having this building done. So the intent is that this building, we'd like to get the permit to be able to get this project moving. But the idea that we get this built and almost built, so to speak, but we'll begin the process of doing the demolition for here, for abatement, for, you know, all those kinds of issues related to it. That's all described in the CRC documents. We'll make sure those are done in a timely fashion. So the anticipation is that we're starting construction now, October-ish, and that we'll be done then. We're anticipating by next summer. We were hoping to be a little earlier, like probably April or May, but chances are we may now be into maybe August because of how the process has now impacted this building, which is okay. We're learning that there's now a change with how the city does things. And we appreciate that. But in this process, our anticipation is that we would be down because of a lot of conversation about transition between the old building to the new. We're only thinking this building will be shut down for about a day or so, while some pieces of this get moved over here, but they're very few in number. The majority of this is all brand new stuff going into this building, which we appreciate. So the transition from one to the other will be very quick.
The ice cream.
The ice cream,
Quickly.
yeah. But the idea of saying that there's
whole
going
bunch
to
of
be, there's going to be a
scoops.
quick transition there. So if we finish this in August, as an example, we'll start this shortly thereafter. And the goal would be, I don't think we can get it all demoed and ready to go parking wise by the time of October or so, when usually asphalt starts disappearing for the year. Hopefully we have a 75-degree temperature going all the way through October next year and into November, maybe. That's just me hoping out loud as an
And
optimist.
is that phase 2B then? After the demolition, phase 2B is the finishing the parking lot and landscaping?
Well, that's a good question, because the way this was shown, this is before we made the promise and the agreement with the city to do the right turning lane. So now that we understand the right turning lane, we do have it drawn. Randall Vickers is here from Meridian. He's a civil engineer licensed in the state of Utah, but he has drawn all of this right turning lane up, and I think we submitted it to the city already. But we would anticipate that this may have to be done. Maybe it's excuse me, I'm dry here, 2A there and 2B here, maybe. We may have to get that done. But when I say that, the demolition of the building will have to happen before we put the right turn lane in. But I would think we sequence those overlapping most likely because of the sequencing of the construction of both of those. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So is the old building, is the new building going to be operational at some point before the old building comes down? Is that the idea?
Yes.
Okay.
Our idea would be that we're ready to open it up. Brent Craig is here. He's the managing director of dining services. And as we talked with him many times, the goal would be that there's a big announcement, all the hurrah, come get your ice cream, whatever. All that'll happen. And then as we open up that building, this building right here will then go ahead and shut down this building right here. And that building will most likely, as I said, the transition will be very short between the two.
Okay.
I've got about 5 more minutes, I think. Other questions? Happy to answer any questions you may have.
I'm just listening to the timeline, wondering if the, I don't know how the permitting and the occupancy works. If they don't have the parking that they said they would have before the grand opening of the new creamery, can they open the new creamery?
So we're gonna have parking and the front of the building, okay, there's gonna be some area here, if I can get that green thing working. So the front of the building sits approximately here. So there's gonna be parking that's gonna be here still that we put in as part of phase 1 that allow for the creamery to have parking for it. Is it sufficient? No, it's not. But the idea would be then, are we gonna demo all of this out of here? There are utilities going through the area and we'll have to do repairs related to it. But I don't think it's a finalization as to whether all of this parking goes away. It may be transitioning from phase 2A over to phase 1. Right now, we want it there for the reasons we talked about, which was to support the existing building. But I would anticipate that all the new parking that's going to go out in this area, in a sense, and a new drive aisle that's going to be here, I would expect that area is going to have to all be demolished and taken out. But I would anticipate, to your question, we should have sufficient parking. There's going to be some, as I said, up through here, but I'm expecting that node of it could most likely then be transitioned over to this. It's a great question, and it's planted a seed in my mind as the campus architect and project manager over this specific project. I'm going to ask that question of our people and try to push to the idea that we keep that area of parking for the building, the new one.
Are there any certificate of occupancy requirements that would say that's not going to work?
Great question.
We'll have to work with BYU on a phasing plan and work through this detail, but we'll do that as part of their.
But there's wiggle room where you don't have to have the 112 on opening day?
Yes.
Okay, that's what I wanted to find out. Thank you.
We also have lots of parking. For example, we talked with the idea that during this process, and we've talked about it with all the way through the administration, right to the south of this is the new music building and parking that is between the Heritage Drive and the music building. So there's portions on the north end of that that may be able to help support this process. When I say may, we're not exactly sure what the timing would be and exactly how that is needed. If it's summertime, not a big deal. If it moves into fall semester, when we have a lot more performances and things like that in the music, that could become challenging.
Can you show us where you have bike facilities on the property, on the
That's
plans?
a great question. I'm going to ask our architect, Brad Ashworth is here. Brad, can you tell us exactly where and should I pull up that other plan? Maybe the one that has, oh, I'm going the wrong way.
Where you're at actually has, there's the,
Here you go. Okay, at the top. Come over here.
right there.
Oh, there it is.
Right
Oh, so he is.
we have a tremendous amount of bike parking.
Those two.
It was originally constructed, as part of the heritage halls, but it can be shared.
I would encourage you to make sure there's signs so that they know they can park there and it's not just for housing. If that's and it may also be nice to have a few of the little loop ones like you do at the creamery right now, just for those who might not figure it out or feel comfortable.
Understand what you're saying.
If we're trying to make it pedestrian friendly and we want kids to be able to get there safely. It
Like
might
what
even be nice to have something over by the patio areas, because that's where most of the off-campus people will be arriving from that side.
Yeah, and Commissioner Jensen, everything you're saying to me is not for me to push back, and I agree with you. So I want to look at that concept and idea that where those outdoor seating areas are, it may behoove us to be able to put some parking there. I don't think it wants to be for all the students that are going on the campus, and usually they try to park closer to campus
But
anyways.
you could
the
with
idea-
a simple sign say BYU Creamery bike parking only or something, and you've
Yeah.
right now accomplished that.
We could do that. That'd be easy to do, very simple to do. And I can certainly see, I hope I'm going to push the right direction here. I could see where we'd look at doing something, as you said. Now, this landscaping seems to be way overdone from my perspective, but the idea that we could do something in this zone, for example, maybe there's something up in this zone, right up in here where the ramping system is there. But I like your idea that there is going to be children that come from across the street and they may ride a bicycle. I've seen it as I drive around campus sometimes. But the idea that they could come across this area through here, come up over there and park here, then go in and get ice cream if they would like to.
I'm even looking at that area on the southeast corner of the building that it's probably gonna have windows for walls, but it's off of the sidewalk setback a little bit that you could have bikes right in there
Could be some here too. And yes,
without getting
that's
rid
all.
of any of your landscaping, because your landscaping is your saving grace for the fact that your parking is what the street sees. So I don't really want you to get rid of your landscaping. I want it to be as pretty as possible.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Other questions? I think I am almost on time there.
I have a question, just for my information to understand what's going on here. Could you explain like the reason why the plan has been to do a full new construction of the building as opposed to say renovating or expanding the existing building? Like what's the mindset there?
Commissioner Shin, I said the right, Shin.
Yes.
I appreciate your question. I actually thought that would probably come up tonight.
Mm.
So the existing building, we've debated how old the building actually is. There's some people claim it to be 1941. We actually
Really?
looked at a lot of historical issues like maps of the city and all kinds of things. And we think it's actually 1954 or 1956 approximately. And you look at it, abatement is a major issue in that building. There's a lot of asbestos in there, a lot of problems of that nature. The building is so old and so rickety. We're afraid that if there is a seismic event, even a smaller seismic event in the area, that building will most likely come down, which is very worrisome to us. We've made a lot of buildings across campus move up to 4 levels of abatement right. We moved them up into the high or very good, to extremely high, like the new arts building and music buildings and those kinds of things. We've been doing that for years. But this building here has so many problems with it that the time has come that we thought, how much is it going to cost us to renovate that building? So we did a full study related to it, and it was significant enough. We then started looking after the fact of a first study on that. We then started looking at what's the cost of, concept of replacement. And we came to the point of saying, it's better to replace it than to try to rebuild that building, because you'd probably have to tear it all down anyways in that spot and try to build it from the ground up. Does that answer your question?
Yeah,
Commissioner?
yeah.
I'm curious, is the retail grocery portion, has that expanded? Will there be more
Yes.
square footage dedicated to retail grocery? You said, I'm hearing 70% more.
70% more square
Okay.
footage. And to be exact than the square footage is, okay, that's now going to be 15,400 square feet.
Right.
And the existing building, no offense, but it was more in the around the 10,000 square foot range. As we have space management, they went and took square footages of all of it. There's a small upstairs space as well, even though you have to be about this tall to get into it. But all of that. So we think that it's a real improvement related to the sale of groceries, helping people that live in the area, all the students that live north of us right here, and be able to have good quality foods for them.
Okay, sounds like it's a big enough expansion for both the retail grocery portion and the dining portion.
It is for both.
Okay.
And better organization of it all.
That's awesome.
Right now, if you've gone to the Cone and eaten some lunch, sometimes you stand in line to get refreshment a long time in terms of your drink,
Yeah.
right? So all of that has been worked through in the new design.
You're gonna have more than one drink machine? Oh my goodness, right there.
3, we're gonna have 3 of them. Very nice.
We're gonna hold you to it.
That is the most annoying thing. You're just like, forget it. I don't even want water. I'll just go home.
Any other questions while we have them here?
Let's see what the public has to say.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bernier. We'll go ahead and move this open for public comment. Is there any district chairs present? No one from the district? Any members of the public would like to comment on this? I'm seeing no members of the public come forward. Go ahead and close the public comment portion. Commissioners, discussion?
I have a few things that I think I'm trying to look for the bright side of the street facing parking. And having ridden my bike up and down 900 East, the sidewalk that BYU and Provo City, I assume, have collaborated on between the roadway and the rest of campus is pretty much the only bikeway for that section of road all the way up to the MTC from, I don't know, like 1000 North. And so if you're on a bike, you have to ride on the sidewalk or die. And you've noticed if you've been to the creamery that there's a metal divider, so the pedestrians are on the door side and the bikers are on the street side, which is counter to which side of the road you're supposed to be on, and so I feel like as much as it means you have to go further in from the road or you have to possibly go through the parking lot, I feel like that conflict will be resolved because we're not dealing with already existing infrastructure and we're able to think about pedestrian and bike access ahead of time. And so I feel like that right there is a safety problem that will be eliminated by moving it away. The other thing that's a problem is there's often a lot of traffic backup, and with that parking lot on the southeast corner of the property, even though that's, like the most accessible parking to get into, it's hard to park there because it's very small. And also the backing distance between the intersection and where you pull in there is difficult. So having that removed, I feel like from a public works perspective, that's got to be a much better street layout to have that much more stacking distance before you're turning in and before you're turning out. Less conflict points coming into the left turn lane to go north on 900 East, less conflict points waiting in a line of traffic to get into the parking lot. So I actually see it as a much better alternative. Like ideally, the creamery would be on the 9th East side and all of this fantastic parking and access would be on the other side, but that does make me happy to see those improvements. I love that there's going to be a right turn lane. That will help a lot with some of that backing up problem on 9th East as it comes down to the south side, Heritage Drive or whatever that was called. And I like that it'll be right turns only in and out on that north end. I'm sure there'll be people that try and break the rule, but having it laid out the way it's shown here will make that safer. And it will make it safer to be on a bike or as a pedestrian as well, because there'll be less turns possible, less directions to be coming from. No.
And it looks like that they'll be able to come out on the south side and do their left turn there.
And with plenty of room to get to it too. It's not like the way it is right now, you have to turn out and block the westbound lanes if there's anybody in the turn lane, if you want to make a left turn, because there's not sufficient. There's only room for 2 cars or whatever before you go there. So I think that's a positive thing. I love the design of it. I love the layout of it, the different accesses, that there's not just the one door. I love that it meets a community need. And I'm not just talking selfishly about me going to get a kid's meal with my kitty cone. It meets, like, to have a grocery store up there is a great asset to not just campus community, but to the surrounding neighborhoods. So I think that's kind of cool.
Yeah, I do know. Yeah, the surrounding neighborhood uses that as
You see it every time you're
quick
stopped at that light.
grocery
You see
stop.
little kids going across the street any time of year to go to the creamery.
And so I like that they just didn't expand the dining portion, which seems to be the most popular, but they're committed to expanding the grocery portion as well.
I also like that you guys expanded the dining portion with intent to use the outside space year round and not just summer. I think that was very, very thoughtful. That's cool.
I'm a fan of the design of the building and the plaza. I think that looks like a really nice space. Years ago, I used to live in Heritage Halls, and I would walk down in the snow in the winter. I remember carrying way too many bags of groceries up to the dormitory from the old creamery. So it's it's good to see that it looks like it's a plan that's been thought through well, and given a lot of care to be an asset. I think that thinking about the clientele here, thinking about students who are going to be coming here, I would really love to see. I think I'd like to see more emphasis for bike parking. There's a really beautiful entrance, as you've shown. There's the plaza, the hangout spot. Everybody's going to want to be there. It feels like a miss to not have some bike parking where people can come and and easily access that with their bicycles and not have to go around to like the back to this kind of hidden, spot that's shared with other stuff. I would really love to see bike parking included on the, on the front as a,
As a user, it's
Yeah.
much easier to locate where you're supposed to be and you feel safer about leaving your bike there. If it's
Yeah,
not tucked
exactly.
away.
Yeah. And just it saves you time. I think that it seems like it shouldn't be like you should with the landscaping, it would be really great to have some of that space able to be used for that in the same way that we've given a lot of a lot of accommodations for people who want to drive into here. I wonder a little bit about with the south axis, if that is kind of where we're thinking there's going to be bicycles and kids coming and stuff like that, is that an issue just to have a small sidewalk, as opposed to like a wider path that could accommodate, because kids will be coming on their bikes and students will be, probably wanting to ride their bikes or walk them on the sidewalk. Is that, is that cause for thinking like there should be a wider sidewalk in the south,
So one thing I was thinking is as you're planning your parking lot layout, to make sure that you can include safe pedestrian walkways through the middle. It kind of looks like maybe you have that in that center lane of parking spots. But this is along the sidewalk where the road crosses over to go into the parking lot. And then in the interior of the parking lot, I think you need to make sure that you incorporate safe pedestrian so people can get from their cars to the creamery through the middle of a parking lot in a way that's marked, so people will be less likely to run them over.
Yeah, and I see that as signage on two parts. One, signage to discourage kids, and part of it's educating parents, like not to have their kids cut through parking lots. So there's signage like, pedestrian access this way, or do not cut through the parking lot. I don't know what to do. If there's wayfinding or signage that could address that, and the second part being, either through striping or some other thing to designate to people using the parking lot to slow their speed or watch for pedestrians, just to have that additional kind of safety reminder that, yeah, there might be some over-eager
Yeah.
six-year-old cutting
You
through the
could,
parking lot.
I mean, even thinking you could be clever with it, right? On that south entrance to the parking
Cougars
lot.
don't cut corners.
I was gonna say, attention, cougar crossing, just like to draw attention to the fact that this is a conflict point between pedestrians, bikes, and cars, and you want the cars and the pedestrian users to be aware that they need to pay attention to each other at that crossroads. And I think you could do something similar just as an education idea and also as just a sound design idea. And you looked like you had an answer to my question.
Or Commissioner Shins, once again, those are not to scale. So the sidewalk on that whole south side to the corner would be the larger
Yeah,
area. So
yeah.
it's not a smaller sidewalk that's going in.
Yeah, I understand that.
What
Yeah.
are the widths of those sidewalks on 9th East and on the south side? Are they, right now they're pretty wide walks. I'm curious.
10 along
10 along
9th East,
9th East and 8
and
along
8 along
the south end.
Heritage. Mhm.
Okay.
8 looks like in front of the building until you get up near the building, then it's wider.
8 is in front of the building. And then 8 is going up through that patio portion, and then 10 being wider in front of the actual doors.
No, I'm talking just on wrong.
Along Heritage Park Drive and 9th East.
Yeah.
How wide are those?
8 there, 10 there.
Okay.
Curtis worked with us, making that a 10. We paid for half and the city paid for half. Also on the other side, on the east side.
Come to the
Can you come into the
microphone.
microphone? I'm
They
sorry.
can't
I'm
hear-
just
they
for the
can't hear
purpose
you.
of the record
It also got to
preservation.
go on the record. So working with Mayor Curtis when he was here, I got to know him very well. He wanted to, as you suggested, get bicycles off the roadway for safety's sake. And so that sidewalk over on the far edge over there, that is 10 foot. Now, as we put in that turn lane, it's going to have to adjust, come over and then tie back in as it continues south. Okay.
But it
On
will
the-
look similar.
It'll look very similar. On the east side, it's 10 all the way up until you get up to the Y mount. And I don't know if it goes beyond that towards the church property by the temple. I don't know that for sure.
I don't know if it's 10, but it's rideable.
Yeah, and it is 10 all the way along the BYU edge, so to speak. May I make another comment or two? I
Yes,
realize
please.
Our time is way over.
No,
But-
what we do, we reserve the right to bring you up for further questioning. So this isn't cutting into
Yeah.
time.
So I think as I looked at other people here that are part of this project and key individuals in it, I think the idea of putting bike parking near that building and near the front door resonates with all of us. We'll work on that and figure it out. I looked at Randall Vickers and he says, we'll figure it out. So we can figure that out and take care of it. For people walking through, on the arts building, we came to the planning commission, as my recollection, and talked about things. We actually put the BYU standard fencing like you see by the north of the law school. That's on the Heritage Drive here, that nice green fence that has the top on it. I could see us going into the idea of maybe doing something along this edge in a sense that has fencing to encourage children and
Okay.
signage appropriate, et cetera, to come up to this location.
Whether it doesn't necessarily need to be a 6-foot fence, but something that
no.
discourages the cutting through the parking lot.
And
I
we've
like
done
that.
it before, 4-foot or, that
Uh-huh.
kind of thing as well.
That's a really good idea. Because
Yeah.
I hadn't even thought about,
that
I
was-
wasn't even thinking about sidewalk people crossing through. I was just thinking about getting from your cars, but
Yeah.
that's an
Oh,
even
that would
bigger
make
problem.
me feel 10 times more comfortable knowing that there are kids that come from across the street
Yeah,
that
the three streets.
Keep them on the sidewalk. So
Yeah.
there's only that one access point instead of a multitude of them.
And I'm going to ask Randall this question, because again, I'm not sure exactly if this is the right drawing now, but Randall, is that also a walkway through here? Do you remember that? It is not.
Drainage.
Drainage.
It's drainage.
Okay.
So it's a,
Okay, well, I would encourage a walkway. If you want to see an example of a bad one, go look at the Provo Airport, but it does in fact have one in its plan. So that's why I point to it as something that realizes we've got a giant expansive parking lot and a lot of people all trying to get to one door. And we want to be able to make sure they can get through the parking lot safely. So I feel like it's a really important design element to remember when
We
you're
did-
pulling people from their cars.
and we've done that, Commissioner Jensen, elsewhere on campus. So I think it resonates with me at least, the idea we try to figure out how to get people through there safely. I also like the signage idea that was talked about by Commissioner Gonzalez as well. So we ought to figure that out and see if there's ways. Pedestrian safety, students first and always from our perspective is very important, but the public is also extremely important to us. So we like our areas to be safe. And I think your comment's a very good one. We'll work on that and take a look at
I
it.
think that planning for things like this is trickier now than it used to be because you can 95% of the time be sure that the people that are walking through the parking lot aren't paying attention. And so like they'll always be looking down or be distracted by something, and especially the demographic that is on campus. And so you really have to spoon feed the pedestrians so that it's hard for them to mess up.
So and you see a lot of people with these in as well.
They can't hear the car coming. They
Can't hear
they don't see the car
Yep.
coming. So let's give them infrastructure that makes it totally obvious for them to know where to walk.
So we'll give some thought to that and make sure it's achievable, because I agree with what you're talking about.
And I would also sort of just give you a heads up. I've seen a lot of the people who bike in Provo are family bikers. And so you don't just want to have a little loop-to-loop bike place for one bike. You're gonna have people with the trailers towing their kids to the creamery. Like at the music building, probably not so much, but
Yeah.
when you've got a place like this that's going to draw from the outside community, I think you need to make sure you're thinking logically about the types of bikes that are going to be parked, maybe scooters, some way to lock up the various modes of transportation that you don't want to discourage, because it'll be a good community place.
I agree with what you're saying, and just as a reference, kind of a precedent in a sense. On the campus, we have done a lot of bike parking and major portions of bike parking with those ideas in mind. The rideables are a very challenging issue in today's world. How many people will ride a single-wheeled platform and cut through traffic and all kinds of things? It's very scary. But I think we've got to find ways to deal with those kinds of issues. But the bike parking areas, we've now been putting some canopies in places. We've been doing a variety of things. And as we talked about, Brad talked about the idea just north of that building is already some covered parking. It doesn't get used often enough that it may get used for some of this. We'll figure that out.
And if you decide that's your overflow parking, that's great. But I think it wouldn't be very hard to say overflow parking like to just let people know that they can park there
Yeah.
so that because it's very frustrating to go to campus for any event and wonder where the closest parking spot is for
Yeah.
whatever vehicle you happen to be in.
Yeah, and I could see where along the lines what you're talking about, we figure out how to put some parking out front of here for bicycles and then another sign that says additional parking around the corner.
You've
Yeah.
met the needs, because you're right, those heritage bike racks were full when Heritage was new. And now that it's been a couple of years, they barely have bikes in them,
A lot of
not enough to fill them anyway. So there's plenty of opportunity.
other questions you may have. And again, I'm happy to step up and help you, and certainly we can have Ms. Robinson come back up as well.
I appreciate the clarification with the sidewalks and the widths. Looking at the diagram here, when I look at, you know, the straight north-south portion going along 9th East, and then Heritage Drive, right, the curving portion that goes up there. You know, my thought initially is like, it seems like that would make a lot of sense to be the wider part on the curved Heritage Drive, because that's where everybody's going to have to come in, right? Like if you're coming from the north to south, you know, if you want to not have bikers and pedestrians cutting through the parking lot, it seems that everybody's going to have to go on that curved portion to get up to the plaza area, you know?
Yeah.
And if anything, it seems like that should be wider even than the other. Obviously, nothing is for free, right? So it's easy to be like, you should just pour more concrete, you know? But like, it seems like that's where you're going to collect the most traffic of all the bikers and walkers and people with the trailers are all going to be coming.
So
on that
you're
route.
suggesting that southeast corner also be a 10-foot sidewalk?
Yeah, I think so. And going up to the plaza, you
So
know.
you're suggesting, oops, wrong button. No, but there it is right there. Just got to pull it down. Though, so you're suggesting, Commissioner Shin, that may want to be a 10-footer until it gets
Yeah,
over near
exactly.
the Heritage Central building, perhaps. We've now got a transitional light for pedestrians versus vehicles installed as part of our agreement with the Planning Commission in Provo City for the arts building and for when there's big events happening at the music building. So that is now in. I could see if we end up doing this, I don't think it's all, of course, on the shoulders of Brent Craig and his team. It could be something that we deal with regards to other funding, but it'll be something I'll be happy to bring up with our folks and talk about that.
Okay, yeah, that'd be great. And my last comment, I think, is just looking at the place, yeah, again, as was brought up, the conflict point between that curving sidewalk area and the south entrance and exit to the parking lot, you know? Yeah, right down there. I was walking with my wife just yesterday and we were almost hit by a car in exactly that kind of a place. Somebody just who was not looking, you know, and came about a foot from. So like, I think when you get into these big parking lots, people think drive mode in their brain. And when you have a big parking lot, you know, it's just easy to get into, I'm driving here, you know, and not, I have to think about people who are walking, and it's just, you know.
This is actually one of those times when having bikes and pedestrians on the sidewalk instead of in a bike lane is an advantage, because the times that I've been almost hit there in a place like that is somebody turning right and not realizing that you're on their right side, and then they almost cut you off. And so having the sidewalk gives a little bit of buffer for visibility.
Yeah.
Since there's landscaping between the sidewalk and the road.
Yeah, I would just love to see, as was brought up, if there's anything we can do for safety, striping, signing, things like that, just to make people really clear. You know, you got to yield because there's people coming across here very often, so it doesn't feel safe. Because there's so many places, unfortunately, where you have a crossing that just feels unsafe to walk, you know, and it's dodgy, and you have to run, and you know, it would be really great to not have to feel like you got to do that, just to get to what I think is a really great gathering spot that's going to be really popular, you know. So yeah, that's it for me.
Andrew, you haven't said a word. You don't like ice cream? What's wrong with you?
Just ready to go home.
Hamburgers? Do we, so here's my question, Mr. Pepperoni. I think we all like this. We've talked a lot about suggestions. On a concept plan like this, do we just leave those suggestions in your hands and you as staff make sure that the project plan phase addresses these concerns?
Yes, and Mr. Bernier has paid attention to what you've said, and he's
Okay.
always conscientious to take those into consideration.
Okay.
So I think we're covered.
All right, so we don't need to give you a formal list with a motion or anything?
No, I think we've got it.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't have anything else. I think we're ready to hear a motion. I think some of the things we brought up were things that I don't think they kill the approval, but things that we would hope would be addressed.
I'll make a motion.
Yeah, go ahead.
I move that we approve item number 7, BYU requests project plan approval for the demolition and rebuild of the Cone Creamery building located at 1209 North, 900 East in the general commercial zone in the university neighborhood.
Is there discussion on the motion? Is there a second on the motion?
I'll second it.
Let's go ahead and vote. Commissioner Shin?
Aye.
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 Item number 7 is approved, 4-0. And is there a motion to adjourn? Is there a second?
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, we're adjourned. We did it.